Chapter 238. Lu Chen left the dense forest, feeling a little tired.
No matter who it was, even if he was once a top-notch shadow in the dark world, had experienced the harshest environments and encounters, and had practiced some strange techniques that ordinary people could not imagine, as long as he was human, hiding in the dark soil for 2 days would not be an easy thing to do.
At this time, the bright moon hung high in the sky, and the night suddenly became clear. Lu Chen's clothes were very dirty because of the things that happened in the dense forest, and it was even more obvious under the moonlight. However, this was not a difficult thing for him.
In a remote corner not far from the forest, he took out the new clothes that he had prepared earlier and put them on.
He looked like a new person, and even his complexion looked much better.
Then, he walked into the distance, his eyes occasionally looking in the direction of the sky and clouds in the depths of Kunlun Mountain.
The huge pillar of light that shot into the sky was too shocking, and there was nothing that could block it anymore. Looking at the spectacular scene of the huge winter peak collapsing and being engulfed by the huge smoke and dust, Lu Chen was also silently shocked.
But very soon, his eyes once again fell on the top of the huge pillar of light that shot into the sky, piercing the clouds and changing the color of the sky.
There was almost a black vortex that appeared faintly. For some reason, his heart suddenly trembled.
This scene was very similar to the final scene of the god-subduing spell that the devil cult of the Three Realms had summoned at the end of the battle in the Barren Valley.
Of course, at this time, although the sky was changing, there was no strange miraculous power like in the past, not to mention the terrifying eye that was hidden in the darkness like a demon. After walking for a while, Lu Chen saw many Kunlun disciples running out. In fact, according to the time, it was already late at night, and it was already the time of the Kunlun party's curfew. But what happened tonight was too big, and it was impossible for people to just sit in their rooms. More and more people appeared, and more people began to run in the direction of the winter peak. In the same direction, not only was the mysterious forbidden land in the sky and clouds, but also the main peak of the Kunlun party, Jianghu Peak and Zhongyang Hall, were also there. It seemed that everyone was a little out of their wits and wanted to seek guidance from the elders in the sect. Is it because such a big thing happened that the damn Baldy didn't come? Lu Chen pondered in his heart, but at this moment, his heart was filled with doubts. He really did not know who to trust. How many people do you really trust in this world? The kind of friend that he could completely trust, that he would never betray him? The night breeze was slightly chilly, caressing his face. Lu Chen's footsteps suddenly came to a halt. After a while, he sighed softly, a complicated expression on his face. It was also at this moment that the figure of a young girl suddenly appeared in his mind. It was Xianxia. Her smiling face seemed to be the most heartwarming thing in this cold world. Lu Chen smiled for no reason, and actually felt a little better. He raised his head again to look at the bright moon. The moonlight was bright, and at this moment, the night was actually somewhat bright and beautiful. For some reason, he felt a little tired of the place where the crowd was running to. But he remembered how Xianxia looked when she said she would come to find him a few days ago. Her smile seemed to have never been so clear in his heart. Lu Chen turned around and then said to himself in a low voice, "Forget it, let's go see that silly girl." The location of the Fragrance Garden tea room and the guest room happened to be in the opposite direction of the sky and clouds, as well as Jianghu Peak and other important places. When Lu Chen turned around and walked in that direction, he encountered many Kunlun disciples on the road. He was traveling in the opposite direction alone. Of course, he appeared to be out of the ordinary. However, it was currently night time and such a shocking event had happened. Almost all of the Kunlun disciples were in a state of panic. Hence, no one would pay attention to such an inconspicuous, ordinary character. In addition, along the way, Lu Chen tried to walk in the shadows of the roadside. Many people didn't even notice him and ran past him. Lu Chen secretly observed many people and found that many of them seemed to have gone to Jianghu Peak's Zhongyang Hall to participate in the day's meeting. On their way back at night, such a big event suddenly happened, so they turned back one after another and rushed towards the collapsed mountain peak. What happened? What happened to Dongfeng Peak? Could it be that there are foreign enemies invading? Is there another big earthquake in the mountain? Along the way, Lu Chen didn't know how many questions like these were heard. Obviously, most of the Kunlun disciples still didn't know what had happened. After walking for about half of the journey, the front suddenly became empty. It seemed that most of the people had already rushed over, leaving only the dark houses and pavilions in front of him in silence in the night. Lu Chen remembered that Xian told him that she often stayed here these days because her master, Dongfeng Tao, often came here to drink tea and chat with Melaleuca japonica. It seemed that the two of them had an unusually deep friendship. But now, Lu Chen was only worried that Xian was silly. Although it was very lively in the sky, she also ran over to watch the fun. It didn't matter if he couldn't find Xian tonight, but he had a faint feeling that the damn Baldy was very likely to be there at this moment. In this world, the person that Lu Chen couldn't see through the most and was most afraid of was the damn Baldy who had raised him since he was young. No one understood that person's strength better than him, and no one knew better than him how ruthless that person could be when he really hardened his heart. Of course, it was unlikely that a peerless person like the damn Baldy would care about a little girl like Xian. However, the slightest ripple on the side of a true lord might be a monstrous wave to an ordinary person. Lu Chen didn't want Xian to be in any danger, so he still went over. When he walked near the Fragrance Garden tea house, he saw that the house was pitch black without any lights. It didn't seem like anyone was still staying inside. Presumably, the people who were originally here were either already asleep, or they had been alarmed by the strange changes on Winter Peak and had all run out. Could it be that they really sneaked over to watch the fun? Lu Chen frowned. Just as he was thinking about whether he should go back to Tianquan Peak again, he suddenly heard a burst of footsteps from the side. Lu Chen turned his head to look, only to see that from the direction of the row of guest rooms on the other side of the tea house, in the same dark place, a figure suddenly ran out. His footsteps were a little unsteady, but his speed was very fast. With the help of the bright moonlight that night, Lu Chen clearly saw that person's face and was suddenly startled. He saw that this person was actually Sumo, but his expression seemed to be very strange. The muscles on his face were constantly twisting and twitching, and his eyes were also strangely red and white. At the same time, there were all kinds of expressions of fear and dread on his face, as if he had seen the most terrifying thing in the world, and he couldn't stop gasping for breath. When he ran out, Sumo seemed to also see Lu Chen standing alone on the other side. His footsteps slightly paused, and a trace of murderous intent floated in his eyes. Lu Chen's face darkened. He had been displeased with this young master Sumo for a long time. If it wasn't for that woman, Su Qingjun, he was afraid that he would have already made a move on Sumo. But in reality, even with Su Qingjun around, Lu Chen didn't really intend to completely let bygones be bygones with Sumo. He had asked old Ma to privately inquire about the daily whereabouts of the Su family just to vent his anger. So in this cold and cheerless night, when there was no one around, when Sumo seemed to show hostility towards him, not only did Lu Chen not shrink back in fear, but his eyes lit up and he suddenly took a step forward. But just when he was about to move, Sumo seemed to suddenly feel Lu Chen's murderous intent. This time, he suddenly became terrified, and with a strange cry, he actually turned around and ran. Lu Chen was stunned. He didn't think that this guy would actually run away so straightforwardly. He didn't even care about the face of an aristocratic family's disciple. If it was in the past, it seemed that Sumo wouldn't do such a thing. There was some doubt in his heart, but Lu Chen quickly frowned. After Sumo ran past, he smelled a faint smell of blood. His gaze focused, and he looked at Sumo's back. He saw that there was indeed a bloodstain on the man's right hand. Sumo quickly ran far away. Moreover, looking at the direction he ran in, he didn't go to Heavenly Kuan Peak or that lively place in the sky. Instead, he ran in the direction of going down the mountain. Could it be that this eccentric Su family's eldest young master is actually going back to his home in Kunwu City in the middle of the night? Lu Chen shook his head. After pondering for a moment, he finally gave up on the idea of tracking this person. Tonight was full of unusual phenomena, and a great change had taken place. There was no need to be anxious about such a small matter, so it was better not to complicate things. In the future, there would always be time to slowly find trouble with this guy. He turned around, ready to leave this place. Since Xian wasn't here, presumably, she also went to the sky in the sky to watch the fun. Needless to say, this kind of thing was indeed in line with Xian's temperament. Lu Chen could even imagine the very excited and impatient look on Xian's face when she called her friends. It was a little cute but also a little stupid. He smiled and walked forward. The sound of his footsteps moving forward in the dark night fell in this bleak courtyard. The ground was still wet, and there were many drops of water dripping down. It was probably the result of the heavy downpour not long ago. He stepped over a puddle of water, and his body suddenly stopped. In the darkness, there was a cold night wind blowing. A faint smell of blood drifted along with the wind. Lu Chen turned around. His gaze was a little cold as he glanced around. Then, he slowly looked at the dark room on the other side of the guest room. There were several deep winding corridors and many dripping eaves. He silently stood where he was for a moment, and then he walked over. The moonlight shone on his body, elongating a dark shadow. Chapter 239. The sound of footsteps echoed in the quiet courtyard and corridors. There was a chill in the cold night that seemed to linger on, just like this world that was always covered in darkness. But fortunately, there would always be sunlight after the night. Although there were many darkness, there would always be warmth in life. Lu Chen subconsciously tightened his clothes. He did not know why, but his heart was beating faster. He did not know why he thought of Xianxia. It hadn't been a long time since he had first met this girl, but they had experienced a lot of things. There were many times when Lu Chen felt that Xianxia was a bit stupid. He was used to looking down at her and teasing her, joking with her. But now that he thought about it, Lu Chen suddenly realized that in these days, every time Xianxia smiled at him, the sky was bright and the air was warm. It was never him taking care of her. It had always been that young girl giving warmth to the lonely shadow that was struggling in the cold darkness. She had unknowingly pulled him out of the darkness slightly, letting him feel that little bit of warmth under the light. Perhaps it was not much, but it was precious. It was like a ray of light shining through the dark clouds. Although it was not strong, it was enough to illuminate the darkness. He slowly walked forward. Suddenly, he saw a black shadow lying on the ground in the corridor. It was a person lying on the ground, motionless. The night was too dark and the moonlight could not shine here. It was faint and blurry. Lu Chen could not see the person's face, but his heart suddenly beat faster. He felt that the figure was somewhat familiar. His mouth was dry. Was it nervousness or fear? Lu Chen did not know and did not have time to think about it. He held his breath and slowly walked over. Suddenly, he found that the smell of blood in the surroundings suddenly became stronger. It was coming from the person lying on the ground. An ominous premonition slammed into his heart, but perhaps his years as a shadow had long tempered his will into steel. As if he had lost the soft emotions of an ordinary person, Lu Chen did not scream or even lose his mind. He was like a cold and emotionless shadow as he slowly and cautiously squatted down beside the person and reached out to flip her over. When his hand touched that person's body, he suddenly felt a moist sensation on his hand. Immediately after, that person's body moved a little and suddenly raised his head. He looked at Lu Chen and called out, "Brother Lu." Lu Chen's body trembled. Looking at Xianxia's pale face, he suddenly felt his body relax, as if there was a heavy burden on his heart. He was even slightly absent-minded for a moment before bursting into laughter. Xianxia looked at him strangely and asked, "What are you laughing at?" Lu Chen's tears seemed to be coming out from his laughter. He waved his hand and said, "Nothing, nothing, I just want to laugh when I see you." Xianxia mumbled something. No one knew what she was saying. Lu Chen, on the other hand, let out a long sigh of relief. He felt that everything that had happened tonight was insignificant. He felt that the night was very beautiful. The moon was very round. Perhaps the world was not completely dark. He laughed to himself. Then when he looked down, he saw his palm. The hand that he used to push Xianxia's body. His smile suddenly froze on his face. Under the moonlight, his hand was blood red. His palms and fingers were dripping with fresh blood. "The ground is so cold," Xianxia complained. Then she wanted to sit up. But she had only raised her body halfway when she suddenly lost her support and fell backwards. Lu Chen caught her and let Xianxia lean into his arms. He glanced at Xianxia's body. Her clothes were intact and there seemed to be no wounds. Then he looked at his own body. The clothes on his chest that she was leaning on were soaked with blood in just a short while. His face suddenly paled. He looked even paler than Xianxia's face. There was almost no blood. He carefully held Xianxia and moved his body forward a little. Then he looked at her back. His gaze was stunned. His body began to tremble slightly. Then he was silent. He slowly stretched out his hands and once again embraced Xianxia in his arms. Xianxia leaned comfortably on Lu Chen's chest and let out a long sigh. Her voice sounded a little low, but there was still some of her initial naivety. She said, What happened? You don't seem to have any strength left. Lu Chen gently hugged her. His lips moved slightly. Then he said softly, "It's okay. I just need to rest for a while." Xian said, "Oh." She looked very obedient. It seemed that she had returned to the time when she was with Lu Chen in the land of chaos. She was obedient to everything he said. Lu Chen looked at her. A deep and inexplicable pain flashed through his eyes. But his expression seemed to be calm.
He said as if nothing had happened. "Why are you lying on the ground?"
"I don't know." Xian pouted. She looked a little angry. But soon, it seemed that she didn't even have the strength to be angry. She sighed and said, "I promised Sister Su that I would help her take care of Sumo in the guest room." Sumo. Lu Chen closed his eyes and slowly said these two words. It was as if he was gritting his teeth and the sound came through the gaps between his teeth. "Yes, it's him," Xian said. "He took the medicine and has been sleeping." Then, well, it seemed to thunder, and he began to shout gibberish, but then he was all right again. "I'm still standing here. I think of you, Brother Lu. Oh, the moon is good today." "Hey, why is there a moon? Isn't it raining? Why did I faint? I don't know." Her voice became softer and softer. Her eyes began to close slowly. It seemed that she was very tired. Lu Chen looked at the girl in his arms. He seemed to have thousands of words in his heart, but he couldn't say a word. Xian's slender eyelashes moved. She opened her eyes again and said softly, "Why do I feel a little uncomfortable?" Lu Chen stood up silently. He carried Xian and walked forward, leaving this dark world. Then he said calmly, "It's nothing. You're a little injured." "Injured?" Xian seemed a little surprised. But she seemed to be too tired. She didn't think to see where she was injured. "Yes," Lu Chen repeated gently to her. Then he smiled and said, "It's just a small injury. It's nothing." "Oh, I don't want it." Xian suddenly cried softly. "Don't what?" Lu Chen asked her. At the same time, he had already walked out of the corridor and walked down the mountain. Xian frowned. She seemed to be afraid and disgusted. She pouted and said, "I don't want that kind of bug. You used to always put bugs on me. It's disgusting." Lu Chen's footsteps paused. He continued to walk forward. At the same time he said softly, "Okay, don't put that bug juice on me. Besides, I can't find that kind of thing now." Xian suddenly seemed happy. She smiled. But her whole body slowly leaned against his chest. She said softly, "Brother Lu, I'm a little cold." Lu Chen's hands tightened. He held her in his arms. At the same time, a drop of water fell on Xian's white face. Xian's eyes seemed to be a little blurry. But she still felt it. She shook her head and said, "Hey, it's raining. Or are you crying? Brother Lu?" "Nonsense. I've killed countless people. I have a heart of stone for more than 10 years. How could I cry?" Lu Chen said with a smile. He walked forward. Then, a drop of water fell from his cheek and fell on Xian's chest. Xian answered. She seemed to completely believe Lu Chen's words. But after a moment she asked again, "Brother Lu, can you cure my injury?" "I said it's a small matter. The medicine will cure it. Don't worry," Lu Chen said. "But I don't want to stay here," Xian said. "I'll take you away," Lu Chen said immediately. His tone was as firm as steel, as if this was the right thing to do, as if everything was only natural. "Where do you want to go?" Lu Chen asked. Xian's head was completely leaning on his chest. Her eyes were slightly closed. Her face was so pale that it seemed to be transparent. The breath in her mouth was also weak. But it seemed that she still didn't want to sleep. She still wanted to talk. So she persisted and woke up again. She forced her eyes open and smiled at Lu Chen. "I want to see my parents," Xian said. "Let's go now." Lu Chen held her and suddenly sped up. But after a moment, he suddenly felt something. He looked down and saw that Xian's eyes were open. She was staring at his face. "What's wrong?" Lu Chen suddenly didn't dare to look at this pair of pure and clear eyes. He looked away. Then he heard Xian whisper, "Brother Lu, you lied to me again." I didn't. Xin suddenly interrupted him and said, I saw it. You were crying so sadly. Under the moonlight, the man's face was covered in tears. He shook his head and gritted his teeth, trying to laugh. But each laugh turned into a hoarse whimper. He wanted to beat his chest and yell at her, but he didn't dare to look at her eyes again. Under the moonlight, he held the girl and staggered forward. He was like a stray dog that had lost its home. He crazily wanted to grasp the last bit of hope, but in the end, he couldn't stop the girl in that warmth from leaving. Her pale hand reached out and Xin wiped his face, wiping away some of the tears. Then she complained to herself, although her voice was very soft and low. I haven't even gone to the heaven vault cloud realm. In the end, even the mountain has collapsed. How boring. Her voice gradually became lower and finally couldn't be heard. Lu Chen's footsteps instantly stopped. He watched as that hand slid down from his face and weakly slid to the girl's side. He was dumbfounded. He slowly raised his head and looked at the deep night sky, as well as the cold moon. The black fire once again burned fiercely in his eyes. A terrifying and ice-cold murderous intent leaped out from the darkness like the shadow of a demon, emitting a soundless howl towards the darkness. The night, the deeper it got, the colder it got. Chapter 240. Su Qingjun left the Zhangyang Hall on Heavenly Kuan Peak a little later than most people. She was passing by Qiandeng, Mingyue, and her master, Taoist Master Mu Yuan, when Taoist Master Mingzhu suddenly asked her to wait at the entrance. Masato Kahara was somewhat dissatisfied with this, but Su Qingjun was a filial disciple, so in order to avoid conflict between her master and them, she voluntarily stayed behind. Later, He came over, but Su Qingjun didn't like this person. Even though He was one of the most outstanding genius disciples of the younger generation of the Kunlun party, just like her. Sumo was her only younger brother, but he was seriously injured by He, so the hatred between them was already very deep. Moreover, Su Qingjun could more or less feel that although He usually didn't do anything out of line, including looking at her with a peaceful gaze most of the time, he also had a feeling of disgust towards the Su family. Su Qingjun didn't know how the Su family on her side had offended him, that he would always target the Su family. Perhaps it was because of He Gang's death a few days ago? In retrospect, He Gang's death was indeed a little strange. No matter who saw the timing of his death, they would suspect that the Su family secretly did it to vent their anger. But Su Qingjun herself knew that the Su family didn't do it. After leaving Zhangyang Hall, Su Qingjun was worried about Sumo, who was still unconscious in the Fragrance Garden's guest room, so she rushed all the way back. But halfway there, she heard a loud noise, just like countless Kunlun party disciples, and then witnessed the most shocking change in the Kunlun Mountains in 1,000 years. Strange peaks fell, the mountains collapsed, and a terrible and huge pillar of light soared into the sky. It was a scene of doomsday. The entire Kunlun mountain was in an uproar. Everyone in the Kunlun party was in a state of panic. Countless people rushed out of their houses and rushed over there. Su Qingjun was also in the crowd. At that moment, she was also shocked. Then, when she saw a large number of people rushing over, she involuntarily followed them into the sky. For such an earth-shattering phenomenon, something unimaginable must have happened. It might even be related to the survival of the entire Kunlun sect. Because it was the winter peak where Hakushin Jinkuan's Immortal's Cave was located among the clouds in the sky. What the hell happened? She also wanted to know. After returning to Chenkuan Peak's Zhangyang Hall with the flow of people in that direction, Su Qingjun soon found that things seemed to be more complicated than she thought. The elders of the Kunlun party were indeed experienced and knowledgeable. They did not panic in the face of chaos. In a short while, several Yuanying Zhenren came out to calm the crowd. At the same time, they kept issuing orders, and soon, the situation was under control. The crowd slowly calmed down, but there were many people as smart and astute as Su Qingjun. They quickly noticed that something was not quite right. Such a big event had happened, but the head of the Kunlun party, Idle Month, did not come out to command the overall situation. Even though everyone knew that he should definitely be in Zhangyang Hall that night. The Yuanying Zhenren who came out to command and calm the crowd were mostly from the Baichao Tang branch. Su Qingjun even saw her own master, Masato Kahara, among them. When the bright moonlight suddenly appeared in the sky, she could clearly see her master's face brimming with excitement and a smile. Even his voice and movements when he was giving orders to others had unconsciously become confident and at ease. Su Qingjun had some guesses in her heart, but she was not too willing to believe in her intuition. Therefore, she had been standing in the crowd and did not go forward. After staying on Tianquan Peak for a while, she found that those Yuanying Zhenren had no intention of arranging for people to go to the clouds in the sky. She then quietly left. The moonlight was very bright, but the night was equally dark. The Kunlun mountain range, which had just experienced an earth-shattering change, seemed to still be shrouded in darkness. Su Qingjun walked quickly towards the direction of the fragrance garden. As she walked and walked, there was no trace of other people on the road. Seeing that she was about to reach the mountain peak where the fragrance garden was located, Su Qingjun's footsteps suddenly stopped. She felt a slightly fishy wind blowing from the mountain path ahead. Immediately after, a human figure suddenly appeared. A man staggered down from the mountain path ahead. His expression was one of panic and fear, as if he had seen the thing he was most afraid of in his life. It was Sumo. Su Qingjun was shocked and quickly went up to greet him. She called out, "Sumo, what happened to you?" Sumo's body trembled. Her eyes that seemed to be in a state of confusion and blankness suddenly seemed to clear up a little. She stopped and looked towards Su Qingjun. After being stunned for a moment, she suddenly called out in a hoarse voice, "Sister?" Su Qingjun ran in front of her and looked at Sumo's disheveled appearance with astonishment. She said, "You're awake. Are you feeling better? Why did you suddenly run down the mountain by yourself?" Sumo stared blankly at her. After a while she said, "I'm fine. I want to go home now and tell father and mother this good news so they don't have to worry anymore." Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she still nodded. The Kunlun party couldn't be considered too peaceful tonight, so going to her home in Kunwa City could be considered a safe place. She immediately said in a soft voice, "That's fine too. You can go. I have to first thank the elders for saving you. I'll also go back to see you later. Right, isn't Xian looking after you?" "She's now." Before she could finish speaking, she saw Sumo suddenly turn around and run away with large strides, looking as if he was very anxious. Su Qingjun's words were stuck in her mouth for a moment. Soon after, she frowned and looked at Sumo with some surprise. There was a bit of doubt in her eyes, but perhaps it was because she saw him running as if he was flying and seemed to be really well, so she relaxed. After standing in place and thinking for a moment, she decided to continue up the mountain. In any case, Dongfang Tao and Melaleuca Japonica, the two elders, had treated her younger brother, Sumo, so she had to thank them in person. Little sister Xian had helped her greatly, so she also had to go and thank them. In fact, it was reasonable to say that Sumo should also stay and thank them. However, since this good-for-nothing brat ran away by himself, she would have to complete these things herself. She sighed softly, shook her head, and walked up the mountain. The mountain path was undulating and curved, and the moonlight shone through the gaps between the branches of the forest, shining on her beautiful face. In the darkness of the night, there was a bit of coldness. After walking for an unknown amount of time, probably halfway up the mountain, Su Qingjun suddenly heard the sound of footsteps coming down from the mountain. The footsteps sounded especially heavy, and the sound paused, as if they were stepping on the bottom of her heart, drifting out in the darkness, trampling through the original silence of this place. Su Qingjun stopped in her tracks, a little surprised. As the footsteps approached, she saw the figure walking in front of her. Her eyes suddenly widened, and the surprise on her face instantly turned into inconceivable shock and fear. A person walked down the mountain path. To be exact, it was a person holding another person's body. With the help of the moonlight falling from the sky, Su Qingjun could clearly see that the man was Lu Chen, and the pale-faced woman he was tightly hugging, and the person who had one hand hanging limply by her side, was Xian. "You, Xian!" Su Qingjun exclaimed in surprise and ran over with quick steps. However, she just arrived before Xian when she smelled a strong smell of blood. Moreover, Xian's practically pale face and chest that had stopped rising and falling had already explained everything. Su Qingjun almost could not believe her own eyes. When she left this morning, Xian was clearly that lively young lady with a sweet smile. How did it become like this at night? What happened to her? Su Qingjun's eyes were misty, her voice trembling as she looked up at Lu Chen and asked. Then, her body suddenly shook, a shocked expression on her face, and subconsciously took a step back. The Lu Chen in front of her seemed to be completely different from the man in her memory. The warmth and cheerfulness he once had, and that smile that seemed to be there forever, had all disappeared. Right now, Lu Chen's face was solemn, expressionless, looking like it was carved out of stone, cold and full of killing intent. Lu Chen's eyes were perhaps the only part of his face that still had some liveliness, but for some reason, Su Qingjun felt that she might be seeing things, because she seemed to see flames from that pair of eyes, and what's more, that fire was actually black. Just like this boundless, deep night. She's dead. Lu Chen's voice sounded emotionless, so cold as if he was talking about something that had nothing to do with him. Su Qingjun shook her head in disbelief, did not even have the time to care about the strange look in Lu Chen's eyes. Her eyes once again fell on Xianxia's face, said in a low voice, "Why is it like this? Aren't you helping me look after Sumo? When I saw him just now he was still fine. Why would you suddenly?" "You saw Sumo?" Lu Chen suddenly asked. That voice sounded a bit cold, like the cold wind in this night, blowing coldly. Su Qingjun looked at Xianxia, her mouth half open, her face sorrowful, as if she still could not immediately accept this reality, nodded subconsciously, said, "Yes, just now at the foot of the mountain." "Where did he go?" Su Qingjun said, "He said he wanted to go home first, so I let him go, said I wanted to come over to thank Xianxia and her master, and we'll go back later." Lu Chen suddenly stepped forward, and Su Qingjun was startled, hurriedly stopped him, said, "Where are you going? What is going on with Xianxia?" Lu Chen suddenly turned his head, coldly looked at her. In that pair of eyes, there seemed to be a ghost fire flickering, the dark flame suddenly flourished, an icy bone-piercing chill seemed to hit her in the face. Su Qingjun's whole body turned cold, her heart greatly alarmed, retreating 2 steps back. At that moment, she actually felt so clearly that terrifying killing intent directly enveloped her body. Chapter 241. That killing intent was so dense that it was almost tangible, like an ice-cold blade piercing through the air. Moreover, it faintly carried a primitive, ancient, and even barbaric aura of killing intent that Su Qingjun had never seen before. That was an undisguised killing intent. Su Qingjun's face was slightly pale, and one of her hands even subconsciously reached out to grab the treasured sword that she was wearing. However, although Lu Chen's eyes were cold and filled with killing intent, he did not make any further movements. Instead, when he saw Su Qingjun take 2 steps back to make way for the mountain path, he silently carried Xianxia and quickly walked down the mountain. When he walked past Su Qingjun, perhaps it was an illusion, but Su Qingjun seemed to feel that behind this man's terrifying killing intent, his footsteps seemed to slightly pause, like a small ripple suddenly appearing in a pool of stagnant water. The night was deep, the night wind was cold, and behind him was a long shadow of darkness. The moonlight was mostly blocked by the shade of the trees, and in the end, his face could not be seen. He stood in the darkness. He walked in the shadows. This cold and lonely night was ice cold, and the only place that had a bit of warmth was beside him. It was that woman. In the midst of confusion and shock, there was still some concern in her clear eyes. He still remembered, her hands were soft, and she once hugged him so warmly. In the darkness, it was too cold and lonely, and he really did not want it to be like this. But at that moment, he suddenly thought of Ding Dang, the girl who was buried in a lonely grave. Then, there was an even more cheerful and lively girl who was as warm as the sun in the sky. Now, she was lying in the crook of his arms, her body slowly cooling down. They all laughed and cried by his side, like sunlight shining into the darkness, like a rainbow falling into his heart. They were the only warm colors in his dark life, and then they all silently left. His heart turned cold, like frost and iron, cutting off the warmth that was so close to him. Even if there was a moment where he wanted to grab onto that last bit of warmth, he would not be able to do so. So he didn't turn around, didn't speak, didn't look at her, he didn't do anything. This man was like a proud and aloof wolf cruising in the wilderness, facing the wind and snow, abandoning the warmth he longed for, striding into the distance of the deep night, letting the shadow of darkness completely engulf him. Without looking back, he walked further and further away from the woman behind him. Su Qingjun stood there in a daze, watching Lu Chen walk away with Xianxia's body in his arms until he disappeared into the darkness. His figure could no longer be seen. Her mind was in a mess, and she couldn't figure out what was going on. On the night of the full moon, too many strange things happened in the mountains of Kunlun. Everything seemed to be wrong and different from before. Her heart was in a mess, and she didn't know why she always had a feeling of fear. She seemed to have thought of something, but that cold feeling that made her tremble made her almost instinctively want to give up thinking. Su Qingjun closed her eyes. Standing on this deserted mountain path, she suddenly took a deep breath. She gritted her teeth, clenched her fists, frowned her beautiful and delicate brows, quietly recalling, thinking. Then her face slowly turned pale. She thought of what she had seen at the foot of the mountain. She thought of the child who had fled in panic, as if he had done something wrong and wanted to run home to hide under the wings of his parents. Then her body suddenly shook. She opened her eyes and looked into the distant horizon. Looking at the direction of the clouds in the sky, her face instantly turned pale, muttering, "Heaven and earth power, Mount Lingshan has collapsed." She stood there in a daze, only feeling that her whole body was cold, like falling into an ice cellar. A trace of pain slowly appeared on her face. Her mouth called out in a low voice, "Sumo." In the night, Kunwu City was as tall and majestic as before, but it was no longer bustling, and the long street was deserted. Occasionally, one or two shadows ran by, but if one looked carefully, they were all stray dogs and cats. Fatty old Ma, who had always been very lazy, didn't sleep in that night. He left that secluded alley and hid in a deep and dark corner on the deserted long street. That place was a loft on a tall building, from which he could clearly see the movements on the streets near Kunwu City, and he could also overlook the movements of the distant Kunlun mountain. Unsurprisingly, he also saw the earth-shattering scene. After being moved by it, he became even more nervous. He closely watched this big city because this was the task given to him by that person. The night grew darker. At a certain point in the night, on this deserted long street, Old Ma sat up straight and looked into the distance. He saw that under the gloomy night, there were a lot of indistinct shadows moving about in the darkness. Although most of them were scattered and didn't travel together, it was easy to see that those shadows in the darkness were all heading in the same direction. Kunlun Mountain. Presumably, what happened on the mountain tonight had finally alarmed all the demons and monsters hiding in the darkness. Hiding in the darkness, Old Ma sneered with contempt in his eyes. But at this moment, he suddenly saw a figure staggering over from a distance. Under the moonlight, Old Ma recognized at a glance that this was the young master of the Su family, Sumo. Old Ma's spirit was roused, but at the same time, he was also a bit surprised. This person was named by Lu Chen for him to pay attention to and investigate. At this moment, this person appeared on the long street in the middle of the night with a panicked expression and unsteady footsteps. Obviously, something had happened. He hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he still didn't plan to make a move. He just watched as Sumo ran down the long street. And looking at the direction he was running in, he should be heading towards the Su family. Monitoring the movements in this city and a mere Sumo, Old Ma naturally knew the importance of this. But in his heart, he was also a bit bewildered. He didn't know what had happened to this person called Sumo. Just now, looking at his expression, it was as if he had really seen a ghost. It seemed that he was really quite frightened. After thinking like this for a long time without any results, Old Ma's gaze once again swept across the long street. Suddenly, his body shook and he suddenly stood up. On the long street, a man walked over. It was impressively Lu Chen. The cold night wind blew coldly through the long street. That man walked out from the darkness. He carried the body of a woman and looked ahead. The darkness around him rolled and surged, like a roaring demon, like a roaring demon. The clear and cold moonlight shone on the long street, but could not illuminate his figure. The dark flames burned fiercely on his body. It was as if after a long period of imprisonment, he had finally thrown off the suppression. On this day, on this night, he wildly and wantonly burned. Every part of his skin was attached to the black flames. The flames danced wildly in the wind, but did not damage his flesh, skin, or the clothes on his body in the slightest. The night seemed to freeze. All the creatures on this long street suddenly became silent. What remained was only a strong killing intent that had never been seen before. Like a tide, like an angry wave, surging and surging, like a monstrous wave, it followed that man's figure and surged forward. The blood drained from Old Ma's face, his eyes filled with fear. He looked in shock at Lu Chen and the strange black flames on his body. After hesitating again and again, he suddenly clenched his teeth, a determined expression on his face. He leapt out from the attic and ran in front of Lu Chen. With a low roar, he stretched out his hands to stop him.
Have you gone mad?
Old Ma roared loudly, wanting to wake Lu Chen.
But after a moment, his gaze fell on the face of the woman in Lu Chen's arms. Looking at that familiar and pale face, as well as the aura of death that he could not be more familiar with,
Old Ma's face also paled.
The corners of his eyes twitched and he said in a low voice, "Damn it!"
Lu Chen glanced at him but did not say anything. He did not even stop and continued to walk forward.
At the same time, he expressionlessly said, "Get out of my way."
Old Ma was intimidated by his imposing manner. For a moment, he subconsciously retreated to one side and then followed beside Lu Chen. With an anxious face he advised, "Lu Chen, don't go crazy. Listen to me, I don't know how many spies of the devil cult are in this city right now. It's because of the big change on Kunlun Mountain tonight that most of them have gone to the foot of Kunlun Mountain to watch. The city is empty. Listen to me. Stop now and come with me. It's still not too late." Lu Chen's face was as cold as ice, unmoved. He still carried Xian and walked forward. Old Ma was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. But he did not dare to approach Lu Chen.
The terrible black fire burning around him made his hair stand on end.
Suddenly, Old Ma seemed to think of something and said, "Are you going to kill Sumo?" For the first time, Lu Chen's countenance changed slightly. He glanced at Old Ma. Old Ma immediately said, "I just saw him running over. He should be going back to the Su family." Lu Chen nodded and took another step forward. A footprint instantly appeared on the ground of the long street. The dark aura suddenly rose and danced wildly behind him, drowning the entire street. And the direction in which the sea of darkness was flowing was towards the Su mansion in the distance. Old Ma was so frightened that he jumped a few steps forward. He tried to stay as far away from the terrible darkness as possible. At the same time, he gritted his teeth and shouted at Lu Chen, who was almost surrounded by the darkness. "Lu Chen, don't do this. It's not worth it." Lu Chen turned a deaf ear and walked forward. The darkness roared around him. "Do you know that the matter on Kunlun Mountain has been settled? His Excellency has the overall situation under control. Next, you can stand out and live the kind of life you have been looking forward to." Lu Chen's footsteps paused for a moment. But the darkness did not stop. After a moment, he and the dark flames were already moving forward, approaching the mansion with a tightly closed gate. Old Ma roared and rushed in front of him. He stretched out his hands to stop him and shouted, "Are you crazy? You will kill yourself if you do this. With such a big movement, the people of the evil cult will definitely be aware of it. From then on, there will be countless people hunting you down. And you openly used this black fire sorcery. Under the watchful eyes of the public, even Xianxia will not be able to protect you. Instead, he will order the Kunlun party and Xianxia to hunt you down together. If you do this, the world will be happy to kill you. If you do this, there will be no place for you in the world. If you do this, everything in the past will be in vain. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is it worth it?" Old Ma was forced to retreat by Lu Chen. He retreated until he reached the front gate of the Su mansion. At the same time, he was still shouting at Lu Chen at the top of his voice. When the dark aura finally neared the gate of the mansion, when Old Ma crazily roared at him a few times, "Is it worth it?" Lu Chen's footsteps finally stopped. He stood in the darkness, the black fire burning on his body. It seemed to be roaring fiercely at the darkness of the night. He quietly looked at Old Ma, whose face was full of anxiety. Then he raised his head and looked at the dark night sky. The darkness seemed to be boundless and deep like the ocean. This night was really desolate. Chapter 242. Darkness surged outside the gate of the Su mansion, and the murderous aura filled the sky. Of course, it was impossible for such a strange scene to not alarm the Su mansion. Inside the high walls, there was already a clamor of screams, but the Su family were also alert, and no one was stupid enough to open the gate. Instead, on the two sides of the high walls, there were people climbing up a few ladders, looking outside. Then the people who saw the situation outside were scared stiff, and one timid person even fell off the ladder. And on the street outside the gate of the Su mansion, Lu Chen and Old Ma were still vaguely facing each other. Old Ma gritted his teeth and stood in front of the Su mansion, blocking Lu Chen. He roared in a low voice, half anxious and half angry, "Wake up, You are no longer that young and ignorant boy. If you take this wrong step, you really won't be able to turn back. The corner of Lu Chen's eye twitched slightly, and he stood silently. His eyes slowly lowered, falling on the face of Xian in his arms. Her face was abnormally pale, but her expression was very serene, as if this chest was the most secure place for her. There seemed to be a faint trace of a beautiful smile at the corner of her mouth, and at this moment, Lu Chen even seemed to be able to hear her laughter. That girl, as usual, was laughing and scolding him, saying that he was stupid and stupid. As a person, of course, he shouldn't be so stupid. Her voice was pleasant to listen to, like the clear sound of a crystal wind chime in the wind. The cold wind blew through the long street, and the darkness floated and swayed, taking away all the illusions. In the end, she still could not speak. Lu Chen silently squatted down, and gently placed Xian's body on the ground. His movements were abnormally gentle, as if he was afraid of hurting her if he used even a little force. He lowered his head, and his eyes never left Xian's face. After a moment, Old Ma suddenly heard Lu Chen's voice, softly saying, "Young man." He slowly stood up, and raised his eyes to stare ahead. The dark flame was burning, as if using his soul as the torch, as if it was the madness of his life's fate. From ignorance to knowledge, from youth to adulthood, from hunger and thirst to loneliness, from calmness to indifference, from light to darkness, from darkness to shadow, it had been more than 10 years. In the blink of an eye, it was still this familiar city. In those dirty corners of the night, even the aura of the shadows had not changed. Had the youngster grown up? The night shrouded his figure, and he laughed silently in the darkness. Old Ma looked at Lu Chen's expression, and his expression suddenly changed. He couldn't help but take a step forward, but a moment later, his whole body shook, and an icy chill rushed over him. The man in the darkness suddenly raised his head and roared. His expression was cold as he walked forward. This step actually had the sound of breaking through the air. The blue stone on the long street instantly shattered, and a dark shadow whizzed up, like the shadow of a carnival ghost, like a surging tide, trampling through the ice, breaking through the imprisonment. Just as I am not a teenager, and you are forever young, let this long night bloom for you, the flower of darkness that will never wither. In front of the whole Su mansion, the darkness suddenly flourished, and countless dark flames spewed out from the man's body, with the world's deepest evil, with the darkest wildness and anger surging over. Old Ma screamed and took a few steps back. He was only grazed by the edge of the black tide, but he already felt the blood in his chest churning. Old Ma turned pale with fright. He didn't dare to stay here, and immediately rolled and crawled to the side. At the same time he shouted, "Madman! Crazy! Are you crazy?" The tide of darkness surrounded Lu Chen and came to the closed door of the Su mansion. Like a storm, like a huge wave, the black tide suddenly rushed down. At that moment, the world was silent, and the night was bleak. The heart of a young man, although old, is still there. A real man, even if he dies, will not regret. Boom! With a loud noise, the surrounding land and high walls all shook, and the cracking sound came thrillingly in the dark night. Under the rolling of the black tide, the thick door suddenly collapsed, directly exploding inward, turning into countless fragments that scattered in all directions, revealing a naked big hole. The dark tide was boiling, as if it had reached an extreme carnival. It suddenly danced, wrapped up all the light and darkness, and then followed the determined and angry figure, striding forward. Stepping into the door. There was a moment of silence in the Su mansion, and then there was a commotion. Screams and screams came from behind, and as far as the eye could see, there were at least a dozen people with sharp blades rushing over. Lu Chen strode forward, his face expressionless. The black tide rushed past him as if it was real. In a moment, the sharp screams tore through the night. The 3 Su family people who rushed over already had a bloody hole in their chest, and blood gushed out like a fountain, smearing the first trace of blood on this dark night. Lu Chen's footsteps paused slightly, and a strange black aura flitted across his face. It was a familiar ice-cold feeling. Once again, it was plundered from those lifeless corpses into his body, rushing through his meridians and merging into the dark 5 elements divine disk. The black fire became hotter and hotter, the black tide swayed wildly, like an unbearably hungry demon, but also like a hysterical laughter towards the world. That roar seemed to come from the 9 serene hell, terrifying and terrifying. But Lu Chen did not seem to hear it, and went straight forward, killing people in his way, and breaking down trees and walls. Those ordinary guards and servants were no match for him, and almost all died in an instant under his hands. Lu Chen also turned a blind eye to the maids and servants who were running in all directions in the distance and didn't attack him. His eyes, which flickered with black flames, swept over the mansion shrouded in darkness, and then he looked at a place he had been to before, the small courtyard that belonged to Sumo. He sneered coldly in the darkness and strode forward. Behind him, old Ma was lying on his stomach in front of the messy gate of the Su mansion. His face was ashen, and his expression was dejected. Looking at the blood on the ground and the dark figure who was slaughtering people, he let out a long sigh and said, "It's over, it's over." In the quiet night sky, a ray of light streaked across the dark sky, rushing towards Kunwu City like a gust of wind and a bolt of lightning. Under the dim light of the night, the raging black flame soared into the sky, and the murderous aura shook the surroundings. For a moment, it also startled countless phantoms in the darkness. It was unknown how many people in the deep darkness suddenly turned their heads. And it was unknown how much deep hatred was reignited in the darkness of the night. The darkness hibernating under the blue dome of heaven and the black shadows under the high mountain began to turn their heads one after another. Even in the fog in the deepest part of Kunlun Mountain, a black shadow as huge as a mountain suddenly moved. The fog wrapped around its huge and frightening body, but it couldn't stop the pair of dragon eyes burning with black flames from emerging from the fog. It gazed at the city in the distance, as well as the black flame rising from the city. However, the moment it was about to leave the fog, a tall and sturdy figure suddenly appeared in the air. It was true Lord Tianlon. With his back facing the frightening and huge black dragon in the fog. He had a cold expression on his face, but he stretched out a hand and blocked the front of the fog. The huge dragon eyes coldly stared at the back of the fat figure, and a terrifying aura as huge as a mountain seemed about to spit out on the body of this bald fat man. But true Lord Tianlon seemed to be completely unaware of it. He just floated in the air and blocked the black dragon's front. His hand was steady and powerful. As the wind blew, his loose robe fluttered. The black dragon silently gazed at him. A moment later, accompanied by a deep sound like a dragon's roar, the huge black shadow slowly retreated into the fog. At the same time, a somewhat strange voice came from the air and echoed in true Lord Tianlon's ears. Interesting. True Lord Tianlon's expression didn't change in the slightest as if he hadn't heard the voice. But he was also gazing at Kunwu City in the distance. His eyes also saw the murderous aura and the black flame soaring into the sky. After a moment, a ray of light suddenly swept over. It was perfected 1,000 lanterns of the Kunlun party. With a solemn expression, he cupped his hands toward true Lord Tianlon. After saluting him, he said in a deep voice, "The black flame evil technique has appeared in Kunwu City, and the murderous aura is soaring into the sky. It must be an evildoer of the devil cult. Or perhaps he's vainly trying to take advantage of the chaos in our sect tonight. At this time, when the people's hearts are in turmoil, we must deal a heavy blow and show no mercy to intimidate the thieves in all directions. I want to personally lead a group of the sect's elite experts to immediately go down the mountain to suppress and exterminate the evildoers of the devil cult. I've come to ask for your order." True Lord Tianlon silently looked in the direction of Kunwu City. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the depths of his eyes, a complicated glimmer flashed. After a moment, he indifferently nodded and said, "All right." The Su residence was in a mess, but it was, after all, an aristocratic family that had existed for many years and had a strong foundation. Very soon, some cultivators with high cultivation rushed out of the residence. Some of them were disciples of the Su family, and some were cultivators invited by the Su family. Among them, many were even in the foundation building realm. It should be known that in the current cultivation world, the cultivation of the foundation building realm was already very powerful. However, on this night, Lu Chen's strange black flame was like a natural killing machine. It seemed to be the natural nemesis of these cultivators. In front of the wild and whistling black flame, all spells and divine abilities were quickly corroded and destroyed, and what followed was a cruel and merciless death. Even though Lu Chen was fighting one against many, he still didn't fall into a disadvantageous position. What was more frightening was that the surrounding cultivators who besieged him almost quickly felt a strange fact. Not only did this fiend's strength not weaken as the battle dragged on, it became even stronger. To be exact, every time Lu Chen killed a person, the black flame on his body became a bit thicker and deeper, and its power became a bit stronger.
The gloomy life force plundered from these dead cultivators was 10 times or even 100 times more than what Lu Chen had plundered in the past. At this moment, the 5 elements divine disk in his sea of qi was roaring, hungrily devouring the endless life force of killing, and then causing the black flame on Lu Chen's body to become even crazier.
He's not a human. He's a ghost. Finally, someone broke down under the great pressure.
In the face of death, he screamed wildly, dropped his weapon, turned around and ran away. The people besieging Lu Chen roared and screamed wildly, but finally, under the attack of death, they gradually dispersed. They either died or fled. The high wall suddenly collapsed, and Lu Chen walked into the yard. The 2-story building in his memory was gone, which was cut open by Su Qingjuan's sword. But on the other side of the yard, another gorgeous house was built. At this moment, at the door of the hall, Sumo stood there, and his parents, Su Tianhe and Madame Bai, stood in front of him, blocking him behind them. Lu Chen sneered, staring at Sumo behind the 2 people. His eyes were boiling with black fire, like a demon or a ghost, and he was about to walk forward. But at this moment, suddenly there was a sharp whistle in the night sky, and a sword light pierced through the air, straight down, and rushed to the middle of Lu Chen and the 3 people of the Su family. After a moment, the light dissipated, and a figure appeared. It was a woman with a resolute expression, with a trace of pain.
It was Su Qingjun.
In the mansion under the night, there seemed to be continuous shouting and screaming in the distance, but at this time, the courtyard fell into a sudden silence. The night wind blew, blowing the woman's soft hair, and on her red shawl, beautiful feathers fluttered in the wind. She looked back at her family, and her parents stood in front. Although her father, Su Tianhe, had a shocked expression, he was still calm, while her mother had a trace of fear on her face. But perhaps it was family love that suppressed all fear. Even though Madame Bai's body was trembling slightly, she still did not take a step back, and tightly grabbed her only son's hand, blocking in front of him. And her only brother Sumo at this moment seemed to have a strange expression, and his mind seemed to be clear and muddled, but every time his eyes became clear, he saw Lu Chen in front of him, wrapped in darkness, and his expression became abnormally ugly. The corner of Su Qingjuan's mouth twitched, and a trace of a miserable smile appeared on his face. Then he slowly turned around, facing Lu Chen, looking at the man swallowed by darkness, looking at the figure that burned like a demon with black fire. Lu Chen was silent, and then he walked forward, and the darkness surged around him, pressing towards Su Qingjun like a tide. But Su Qingjun stood in the same place, motionless, and did not seem to have any intention of moving away. The black fire in Lu Chen's eyes burned, and his footsteps did not stop, and he came closer and closer to her. Su Qingjuan's hands were tightly clenched, and after a moment, she suddenly said in a loud voice, "This is an accident." "Really, this is an accident." Su Qingjuan's face showed a painful expression, and she lowered her voice, saying, "I went to beg Master Xianxia to save Sumo, and he also gave Sumo the antidote. Everything should have been fine, unless there was a change in heaven and earth that caused the medicine to go out of control. But it was such a coincidence that Dongfeng was destroyed." Lu Chen walked in silence, and the tide of darkness had already approached Su Qingjun, and it was only a few zhang away. Even Madame Bai, who was behind him, cried out in alarm, but Su Qingjun still did not have any intention of retreating. "What happened to little sister Xian? I am also very sad. If possible, I really want to suffer in her place. I also know that no matter what I say, I can't save her life. It's Sumo's fault." But at that time, he must have lost his mind. Lu Chen. She closed her eyes and smiled bitterly. "No matter what, I really can't watch him die like this. I can only beg you, can you let him live? No matter what price you want me, or my Su family to pay, I will do it. In my life, I have never opened my mouth to beg anyone, but tonight, I beg you." Under the night, that beautiful woman said in a sorrowful voice. She bit her lips, and there was a desolate expression on her face. In her eyes, there was guilt, sadness, disappointment, and pain, as if they were all mixed together, and then she looked at the man walking in the darkness. And what she waited for was a short answer. "No." The darkness was like a resurrected demonic dragon. Following this resolute sentence, it rose with a loud bang, and pounced towards the back of Su Qingjun. And at this moment, Su Qingjun seemed to finally let out a sigh, and pulled out her sword with a backhand. Clang! The sound of the sword was like a dragon's roar, and the flickering bright light left the sheath, like the autumn water sprinkling on the world, and stood horizontally in front of the darkness. That beautiful woman held her sword horizontally in front of her, her face pale, but her aura was like a mountain, like the moon, towering and erect, and actually blocked all the aura of the darkness for a moment. The moonlight sprinkled down, and her silhouette seemed so powerful, even though it was a little lonely. That was the strongest young genius of the Kunlun party in 1,000 years, the youngest Jean Dan Friar. The ice-cold aura suddenly surged from the darkness, and directly slashed at Su Qingjun from all directions. Su Qingjun let out a clear whistle, and her body rose together with her sword. Instead of retreating, she advanced, and directly stabbed her sword into the depths of the darkness. There was an angry roar in the raging dark tide, and the darkness behind her surrounded Su Qingjuan's figure. The 3 people of the Su family turned pale with fright, but after a moment, they only heard the whistling sound of the sword, and a sword ray that was as bright as lightning crisscrossed in the dark aura, as if it was not restricted at all. Their faces immediately revealed a look of joy, but in the blink of an eye, the dark tide rose again, and completely submerged the sword ray. The darkness rolled like boiling, and outsiders could not feel what was happening inside at all. They could only see that the wind was as sharp as a knife, and it was obvious that in this short period of time, the battle in the dark tide had become extremely intense. Suddenly, someone in the dark tide let out a muffled groan, and then a figure shot up into the night sky like lightning. It was Su Qingjun. Below, the dark aura flashed, and the figure of Lu Chen appeared. His face was covered in dark aura, and there were several wounds on his body, and blood was faintly flowing out. Su Tianhe and Madame Bai were overjoyed, but when they raised their heads and saw Su Qingjun, their smiles froze again. Their daughter was floating in mid-air, her face pale. She held a sword in one hand, and the other hand was hanging by her side, as if she could not lift it up. This evildoer's cultivation was actually so strong. Why have I not heard of it before? Lu Chen looked at Su Qingjun coldly, and ignored the bleeding wounds on his body, and continued to walk towards Sumo. Madame Bai let out a cry, and Su Tianhe's face instantly became extremely ugly. Madame Bai pulled Sumo's hand, almost cried out, and shouted towards the sky. Little June, quickly save your brother. Su Qingjun stared blankly at the man who was surrounded by darkness. Her lips trembled twice. After a moment, she seemed to be smiling bitterly, as if she was grieving, but finally, she still raised the long sword again. That was an ancient celestial sword. The bright moon hanging high in the sky shone down cold moonlight, and at that moment, fell on the edge of her sword. Lu Chen, who was on the ground, seemed to sense something, and suddenly raised his head to look. At that moment, the sky seemed to suddenly darken, and then immediately brightened up. The dimness was because all of the light suddenly disappeared, all gathered at one point, and then burst forth resplendently on that sword's edge. Taking advantage of this rare full moon night, the cold moonlight, Su Qingjun swung her sword. The elegance of that sword covered the time of heaven and earth. Even the moonlight that filled the sky seemed to follow, turning into sword light, free and easy, falling into the human world, like a lover's last beautiful smile, stretching out a gentle palm, making that last entanglement. Moonlight slash. In the moonlight, cut off all the dust, feelings, life sufferings, sorrow and loneliness, the entanglement of the past 3 lives. Who was the one who was sad? The loneliness of the light, like the reflection of this life. Cut through the darkness, seeing his dark eyes. The black fire roared, rushed up, collided fiercely with the flickering sword light. A loud bang, sand and stones flew, the walls around the entire courtyard collapsed. A moment later, the sword radiance abruptly flourished with unstoppable momentum. It cut through all the black gas and rushed down. Lu Chen dodged to the side and grabbed the blade with his left hand. In an instant, the sharp sword radiance pierced through his palm and arm, leaving a dozen gashes. Light burst out and blood spurted out. He seemed to be completely unaware of it as he expressionlessly extended his other right hand and swatted at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun was in mid-air, her bright eyes bright, the sword in her hand changed, the sword light whistled. In an instant it directly pierced through Lu Chen's left arm and came out. Lu Chen let out a muffled groan, his face finally contorting. At that moment, the sword light was aimed at his heart, but before it pierced, his right palm also carried a sky full of cold wind, the black tide whistling. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, they were so close that their eyes finally met for a moment. It was a deep, deep gaze.
Lu Chen lowered his body.
Pooh! The long sword pierced through flesh, from the other side of Lu Chen's shoulder, brought out a cloud of blood, and a ball of black fire danced wildly on Lu Chen's right palm, heavily imprinted on Su Qingjuan's chest. A mournful whistling sound. Su Qingjuan's entire body flipped and flew out, and then with a pang sound she fell on the ground a zhang away. Her body trembled a few times. With a wah sound she spat out a large mouthful of blood. At the same time, at her chest, the black flame instantly burned into her fair skin and flesh, like the grin of an evil spirit. From then on it lingered. In the tide of darkness, Lu Chen staggered a few steps forward, looked as if he almost fell, but in the end he still held on. But his situation was obviously also very bad. His left hand and shoulder were pierced together by the same sword, forming a ghastly and terrifying appearance. His lips moved, as if he was laughing at himself, then he glanced at Su Qingjun. Just at that time, that girl was also weakly looking at him from the pool of blood.
Neither of them said anything. Lu Chen stretched out his right hand, grabbed the hilt of that ancient sword, and then with a yee-hoo sound, he pulled it out.
The long sword was clear, and for some reason, seemed not to be stained with blood. Only a few beads of blood, slowly dripping from the tip of the sword.
Lu Chen took a deep breath, casually threw the ancient sword on the ground, and then continued to walk forward. In front of the courtyard, Sumo seemed to suddenly wake up at this moment, suddenly shouting. For some reason, after coming down from the Kunlun mountain, he seemed to be especially afraid. Especially afraid. At this moment when he saw Lu Chen, it was as if he had seen a ghost. His entire body trembled violently, and he couldn't even speak. Su Tianhe and Madame Bai firmly blocked in front of Sumo, ready to fight to the death, as if they were unwilling to give up their child no matter what. But Lu Chen's eyes didn't seem to care about this. The cold and powerful black flame once again ignited, and was about to sweep over.
Suddenly, from behind him, came a woman's desperate cry, slightly trembling and crying, "Don't kill my father and mother!"
Lu Chen's outstretched hand froze in mid-air. The moonlight fell on his face. Only indifference. His hand continued to wave out, a black current surged out, incomparably powerful hit Su Tianhe and Madame Bai, and then in front of him, only Sumo was left. Sumo's whole body trembled, both legs trembled, and his face was full of fear, as if he was extremely afraid, suddenly shouting, don't kill me, I am." Before he could finish speaking, his voice suddenly stopped. A black dagger suddenly appeared from the darkness, and with a trace of cruelty, it directly cut through his throat, causing blood to spurt into the air. Next to him, Madame Bai was just about to rush over like a madman. When she saw this terrifying scene, her whole person was instantly stunned. Then she screamed at the top of her lungs, and then her eyes rolled back, directly fainting on the ground. Farther away on the ground, Su Qingjun was also stunned. She stared blankly at Sumo's body slowly falling in the splatter of blood. Her whole person's whole face was ashen. After a moment, she spurted out another mouthful of blood. Lu Chen grabbed Sumo's fallen body, stared at his eyes that were about to lose their spirit, and said coldly, "This is for Xianxia." With that said, the black short sword made a whistling sound again, stabbing Sumo's chest 5 times in a row, with blood spurting out from each stab. Finally, his hand raised the knife, chopped off the head, and threw it to the ground. Then he turned around and walked out. When passing by Su Qingjun, his footsteps slightly slowed, and then he immediately strode away. Finally, darkness, fell on this courtyard again, leaving only a sea of blood. Old Ma stood at the gate, watching Lu Chen slowly walk out, covered in blood, looking at his deformed, abnormally terrifying left hand, and the bloodstains all over his body. He could not help but sigh bitterly, and said bitterly, "Is it really worth it for you to do this?" Lu Chen was silent, slowly walked past him, and came to the dark long street. Xianxia was still lying there, serene and calm. He slowly knelt down beside Xianxia, blood dripping from his body. His whole person looked like a twisted evil spirit and demon. But when he looked at Xianxia, his eyes were gentle, like the naive days of his youth. "It's all right," he said softly to Xianxia. "I have done what should be done." Xianxia was quiet and did not speak. Old Ma showed a bit of pity on his face, and just as he was about to go up and persuade him, his whole body suddenly trembled, and he abruptly looked up into the distance. In the vast and majestic Kunwu city, in the vast wilderness under the moonlight, countless black shadows were attracted by the tide of darkness. They were like gloomy ghosts filled with hatred. And at the top of Mount Kunlun, countless sword lights soared into the sky. They were as bright and dazzling as the rising sun.
They flew toward Kunwu City, and in the blink of an eye, the lights and shadows crisscrossed in front of them, surrounding Kunwu City.
The moonlight was bleak, and the night was boundless.
Old Ma's expression was miserable, and he said to Lu Chen, "What should we do? What should we do?"
Lu Chen stood up, looked at the demons and monsters in the distant city, and in the countless dark corners, and suddenly smiled.
That smile was as gentle as it had been in the past 10 years, as if it was the original intention of the earliest youth, fearless.
He pushed Old Ma away, laughed heartily, and walked forward towards the long street. Darkness whistled around him, and the moonlight followed his figure, the darkest shadow in the world, rushing forward with large strides, rushing into the seemingly endless darkness, penetrating the Iron Army, until death, a man is a youth. Chapter 243. On the night of the full moon, the famous Kunlun party of the West Continent suddenly experienced a great change. The forbidden Ling Mountain was destroyed, and there was a strange phenomenon in the sky that shook the world. Another evildoer was born and brought disaster to the world. It was said to be an ancient evil creature. However, the Kunlun party was a famous sect with profound strength. They fought bravely and finally eliminated the evil creature, maintaining peace. Unfortunately, the sect elder Hakushin Jinkuan was attacked by the evil creature. Although he suppressed and killed countless evil creatures, he unfortunately became an immortal. The sect leader, Immortal Idol Month, was seriously injured and was forced to retreat to heal. Under the leadership of the sect leader, the head of the Heavenly Soldier Hall, Dukan Junren, and other Yuanying immortals fought against the evil creature. Many people died and were injured. The battle was tragic. They also hated the evildoers of the devil cult who took advantage of the people's precarious situation to create chaos in Kunwu City. They used the evil technique, black fire filled the sky, and countless winged demons bewitched the common people and slaughtered living creatures. Kunlun Pai dispatched elite disciples down the mountain to defeat the remaining evildoers of the devil cult. The bloody battle lasted the whole night. During this time of crisis, the Kunlun party's immortal Tianlan stepped forward and commanded the whole situation. He eliminated the evil creature and the devil cult, calmed people's hearts, and turned the tide. He was respected by the Kunlun party and was elected as the acting sect leader, Immortal Idol Month. Immortal Tianlan was virtuous and indifferent to fame and wealth. He refused to accept the position. People tried to persuade him but to no avail, so they elected the head of the Bai Chao Tang, Immortal Qian Deng, as the acting sect leader. The Kunlun sect united against a common enemy and sent out their elites to fight the devil cult of the three realms at the foot of the Kunlun mountain. In the end, they defeated the evildoers and killed countless devil cult's demons. It was called the Change of the Full Moon. The cold and crazy sword light and countless strange lights flashed inside and outside Kunwu City for a whole night. Countless people's blood stained the yellow soil. Since the battle in the Barren Valley in the Lost Land 10 years ago, there had not been such a large-scale battle between good and evil. The scene was tragic and bloody. The great battle lasted until daybreak before it slowly stopped. The devil cult's demons gradually retreated. The black fire produced by the strange sorcery in Kunwu City was also nowhere to be seen. It seemed like it had escaped outside the city. On one hand, the Kunlun party settled the people's hearts in the city. On the other hand, they sent people to pursue and suppress the devil cult's demons. They also sent people to the mountain to report to the acting sect leader Qian Deng Zhenren. They sent their elite fighters to pursue and suppress the devil cult's demons, especially the black fire demons. Thereupon, the Kunlun cultivators searched all over Kunwu. After they found nothing, they learned that the black fire devils had already fled to the south, so they immediately went south in large numbers. Along the way, they encountered many devil cult devils. Both sides fought bloody battles again and again, resulting in heavy casualties. However, in the end, the Kunlun party's people were strong, their horses were strong, and their cultivation was high. The devil cult devils were defeated again and again. Even so, there were still quite a number of devil cult people who were heading south. It seemed like they were also searching for someone. Their urgency was no less than that of the Kunlun party's disciples. At the end of the night of the full moon, Kunwu City was in chaos. The devil cult followers who rushed here in large numbers fought with the Kunlun disciples who went down the mountain in anger. The scene was a mess. Taking advantage of the darkness of the night, Lu Chen restrained his breath. After fighting and struggling several times, he finally escaped from Kunwu City under the cover of the night. However, both the devil cult and the righteous path hated him to the bone. Under the swift and fierce attack, Lu Chen was also seriously injured. It was unknown how many wounds were added to his body. He had to hide here and there all the way to the south. The world was big, but there was no place for him anymore. There were several groups of pursuers chasing behind him, wanting to kill him as soon as possible. Among them, the Kunlun party's cultivation was profound and their power was great. However, the devil cult's pursuers were the fiercest and most ruthless.
If it were not for the fact that the good and the evil path could not coexist with each other and they would fight each other when they met by chance, Lu Chen, who was seriously injured, might not have been able to run so far.
The sun rose and set, dusk and evening passed. When the sky darkened again, after a whole day and night of pursuit, the pursuers behind Lu Chen gradually decreased. With unbelievable perseverance and all kinds of strange and cunning methods, he rushed into a forest. Borrowing the darkness of the night, he unexpectedly attacked and killed the devil cult master who was the closest to him. At the same time, his body had another wound so deep that his bones could be seen. Then he staggered and fled into the depths of the forest. Behind him, there was still a faint whistling sound of the wind. Perhaps it was more pursuers, an inescapable net with deep killing intent. Lu Chen did not have the energy to care so much. The only thing he could do now was to run as far as possible and hide deeper. As for whether the pursuers behind him were strong or weak, or whether it was the Kunlun party or the devil cult, he could not care anymore. Right now, Lu Chen was already on the verge of collapse. His body was covered with countless wounds. In some places his bones could be seen. His entire body was stained with blood. He did not know how much blood he had lost and how much blood he was stained with. He used the last of his strength to run forward in the forest. At the same time, a bloody hand pressed against his chest. His face showed a trace of anxiety. His injuries were already extremely serious. It would be very difficult for him to continue running. And Lu Chen still had one last way to escape, which was the seed hidden in his heart. However, at such a dangerous time, danger lurked everywhere. At any time there could be pursuers from both the good and the evil path. It was really not a good time to use the seed. The worst thing was, once he used the seed to hide in the mysterious tree hole, although it looked like he was temporarily safe, in reality, it was equivalent to starting to resign himself to fate. If this method was seen by others, they only needed to pick up the seed and Lu Chen would be doomed eternally. After all, there was no second exit in the mysterious tree hole. And with the Kunlun party and the devil cult's resources and methods, no matter which side this seed fell into, Lu Chen would almost certainly not be able to escape. Lu Chen definitely did not want to experience the feeling of being caught like a turtle in a jar. Moreover, if he did so, it was very likely that this mysterious seed would be exposed. This thing was too important. Once it was recognized by someone, the consequences would be unthinkable. Therefore, it was extremely difficult to escape for his life. Although he was seriously injured, until now, Lu Chen still resisted the urge to use this seed. It was just that at this time, even he himself felt that he was at the end of his rope. His eyes swept across the already darkened mountain forest. The trees were like ghostly shadows. Panting heavily, after walking for so long, he still did not see what he was looking for. Perhaps that night, everyone's luck was not too good. Lu Chen smiled bitterly in the darkness. Suddenly his legs softened and he staggered, almost fell to the ground. He supported himself on a thick tree trunk and panted for a moment. The hand covering his chest seemed to tighten, but in the end he clenched his teeth and endured it. After looking around, he continued to run forward. Suddenly, a sword light abruptly appeared on the treetop above his head. Immediately following that, a sharp whistle pierced through the silence of the darkness. Like a bolt of lightning, the dazzling brilliance made one speechless. Wherever the sword light passed, the trees split and branches snapped. Leaves flew chaotically. It could be said that its power was unparalleled. Lu Chen gave a low roar. He leapt into the thicket beside him. Right now, he had no more strength to use any kind of resistance. And looking at the power of the sword light, the person's cultivation was not weak. The sword light pierced downwards, but Lu Chen's figure was like a shadow, dodging the attack by a hair's breadth and falling into the dark thicket at the side. Someone in the sword light coldly snorted with some disdain and contempt. The sword light turned, and the sword light was incomparably sharp. It was like an unstoppable wheel of light directly swept across, instantly breaking a row of trees. With a loud crash, the trees fell and grass flew. It was a spectacular scene. But under such power, the darkness did not seem to be moved. It was still silent. Instead, in that chaos, all kinds of fallen trees and messy shadows mixed together. It was like a strange net appeared in the forest. Lu Chen's figure seemed to have disappeared. He was not forced out by that exceptionally sharp sword. The surroundings slowly quietened down. The sword light weakened. A figure appeared. It was a man in his early 30s, dressed in Kunlun clothing. He frowned tightly. He coldly looked around. Suddenly he sneered and said, "Cowardly rat. Only know how to hide." His voice had barely faded away when suddenly a light sound was heard from about a zhang away in front of him on the left side. A dark shadow slightly swept out from the darkness and quickly crouched down. This Kunlun Pai swordsman's eyes lit up. With a shout, his sword gleamed brightly as he dashed forward. As expected, where the sword light shone, the person who was pursuing appeared in the thicket ahead. Bloodstains were still on his clothes. The Kunlun disciple's eyes revealed hatred. He was even more merciless. He stabbed down with his sword, wanting to stab through this evil faction sorcerer's heart. The sword edge whizzed through the air, like a hot knife cutting through butter, almost indestructible. Who? It pierced into that person's back. But the Kunlun swordsman's countenance suddenly changed. He felt that something was wrong with the sword. It was as light as a feather. He focused his eyes and saw that under the sword light, the thing that landed on the thicket was only a piece of clothing. He knew that it was not good. He wanted to withdraw and retreat. However, in the dark shadows, suddenly from the shadowy thicket beside him, a black figure leaped up without a sound. A hand had already pressed on the vital point below his ribs. The black fire ignited in a flash. Like a ghost fire that could incinerate the soul, it instantly burned through the flesh. The Kunlun swordsman's body shook greatly. He opened his mouth and roared. However, for some unknown reason, his voice suddenly and strangely disappeared from his mouth. It was as if someone was strangling his throat, choking all his shouts. The black fire burned silently. The person under the fire had already turned into a corpse instead of killing. Lu Chen, who was standing in the darkness, coughed painfully a few times. Pain surged up on his face. At the same time, a complicated emotion flashed past his eyes. This highly skilled person, perhaps he was once his fellow disciple. Perhaps they would be cultivating the way of immortals on Kunlun Mountain together. They would know each other. But on this night, they had become mortal enemies. This life's fate, who could say it clearly? He gritted his teeth and gasped for breath. That simple fight just now had almost exhausted the last of his strength, but he still struggled to move forward. But at this moment, his body suddenly shook. In the dense forest ahead, a faint light suddenly shone. It coldly floated towards him. The murderous aura was cold and sharp. Like an avalanche, it filled this dark night and completely surrounded his figure. Chapter 244. The dense forest was still somewhat damp. Most likely the earliest storm last night had ravaged this part of the forest. Everywhere was wet. Behind him, the already dead Kunlun disciple was lying in the dirty water. The air began to fill with a strong smell of blood, but it did not come from a dead body. That dim light in the depths of the forest seemed to be slowly approaching. Because the sky was dark, the forest was too dark, and there were many trees blocking the view, so Lu Chen could not see clearly what it was. He could only vaguely see that it was a huge monster, but it did not look like a human, so most likely it was a demon beast. Lu Chen's heart sank. He suddenly thought that during this escape, especially after entering this part of the forest, he did not see a single demon beast. This was obviously not right. And from the sharp breath coming from the front, he was afraid that the demon beast that suddenly appeared was not a good one. Bloodthirsty and violent was unavoidable. Encountering this kind of thing, the best way was of course not to take it head on. Not to mention that Lu Chen's current situation was not much different from a lamp that had run out of oil. He was just short of collapsing with one touch. To be honest, with his experience these few days, not to mention ordinary people, even if it was a normal cultivator, not many people would be able to withstand it. Lu Chen tried his best to calm his breathing, and then began to slowly retreat. In the process of retreating,
He did not even dare to turn his back to the dim light in the dense forest, because his past experience had long made him know that if he still showed his back when encountering a powerful demon beast, it was equivalent to shouting to the demon beast to quickly come and eat him. It was just that in these few days, his luck seemed to be extremely bad. He had only retreated 3 or 4 steps when suddenly a gust of cold wind came from the forest behind him.
Lu Chen's expression changed. He looked back and saw that in the forest, 2 figures slowly appeared. Both were dressed in black from head to toe, their faces were covered with a black cloth. One was holding a long sword, the other was holding a strange weapon like a flying ring. Looking at their attire, coupled with their undisguised murderous aura, as well as the deep-seated hatred in their eyes, it was 100 times stronger than the Kunlun disciple. They were obviously from the Three Realms demonic sect. Lu Chen sighed. After hesitating for a moment, he still slowly turned around, facing the 2 demonic sect disciples, giving his back to the mysterious demon beast in the forest. Sometimes, humans were actually much more terrifying than demon beasts. Traitor! An angry roar filled with disdain and hatred came from the masked man in black.
The 2 men did not have the slightest thought of tolerating Lu Chen's breathing or understanding that he was seriously injured and at the end of his rope.
Without hesitation, they launched an attack. Their weapons flashed with a cold light as they fiercely slashed at Lu Chen. It looked like they wanted to immediately cut Lu Chen into pieces.
The sword wielder charged straight into the middle of the door, while the person holding the strange flying ring weapon suddenly split into 2 in midair after activating his weapon.
He split into 2 and circled around to both sides, actually forming a pincer attack with the other person.
The killing situation was set in an instant, without the slightest thought of tolerating Lu Chen's mercy. Lu Chen's breathing became heavier, his eyes cold. Suddenly the veins on his neck bulged. His entire body looked as if it was about to collapse in the wind, without knowing where the strength came from. He suddenly shot forward, completely disregarding the 2 flying rings flashing with cold light behind him,
directly pouncing towards the sword-wielding man in black.
That man in black seemed to be taken aback, but he had no intention of retreating. Instead he gave a hideous laugh. The sword in his hand became even more intense, directly chopping over.
Anyone could see that right now. Lu Chen's entire body was covered in injuries. The situation was terrible. Right now it was just a deathbed struggle. Lu Chen's hurried leap caused him to temporarily pull some distance away from the flying rings behind him.
However, the swift and fierce sword light in front of him abruptly closed in.
In an instant, it was already right in front of him. Lu Chen's pupils even reflected the shadow of the sword light, but it suddenly disappeared right after.
Because all the light in his eyes was suddenly swallowed up by a ball of dark flames.
The black flame ignited. Although it was already somewhat dim, the murderous aura did not weaken in the slightest.
Darkness surged around Lu Chen, causing his figure to seem to blur for a moment in the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint.
Pooh!
A muffled sound. Just as the sword light chopped in front of Lu Chen, the darkness still silently surged over the blade, flipped over the sword hilt, and wrapped around that black-clothed man's palm.
Ah!
The black-clothed man who had been brimming with killing intent suddenly howled loudly, as if he had suffered unimaginable pain in that instant. Even his voice was so sharp that it seemed to have deformed, causing the other black-clothed man not far away to jump in fright. The black flames burned on his hand, directly burning into the flesh. The long sword fell to the ground with a bang sound. An icy but familiar cold energy gathered from his wrist, once again merging into Lu Chen's dantian.
As if bitten by the world's most terrifying venomous snake, that black-clothed man fell to the ground and began to struggle with all his might. But at this time the 2 flying rings were already chasing after him again. Lu Chen's body swayed, as if he wanted to dodge, but his body staggered, unexpectedly not dodging. Poo-pee-you sound. The 2 flying rings directly pierced into his back. Lu Chen's vision darkened, and he could no longer support himself. Staggering forward a few steps, his legs softened, and he knelt on the ground, using his hands to support himself, as if he wanted to force himself to stand up again. But no matter how hard he tried, he did not have the strength to support his body. Instead, he forced his body several times, causing several wounds to open up, and blood flowed out. But the blood was not too much, not because the wounds were not deep enough, but because he had already lost too much blood.
Finally, there was still no way out. Lu Chen only felt that his vision darkened. His entire body felt like it was about to fall apart, and the remaining traces of strength were quickly dissipating, and everything that he saw at this moment, the night, the forest, the trees, the shadows, the black-clothed, and that strange dim light, suddenly blurred and began to spin. All the sounds seemed to be fading away. The pain was like a tide from every corner of his body, making him feel like he was in the terrifying purgatory of the 9 netherworlds. This was a pain that was enough to make an ordinary person collapse in an instant, but Lu Chen felt a strange sense of familiarity. In the past 10 years, every time the black fire curse flared up, and the black flames burned his body, he would be immersed in this terrible pain, unable to extricate himself. Now, because he was about to die, was the black fire finally beginning to bite back? The black-clothed man with the flying rings glanced at his comrade, who was obviously already twitching on the ground, and fiercely rushed up to kick Lu Chen. Lu Chen fell to the ground with a bang, dirty and wet soil splashing on his face. The black-clothed man cursed, his eyes revealing a fierce light, and with a wave of his hands, the 2 flying rings flew out of his body and back into his hands, bringing with it a flower of blood. At this moment, Lu Chen didn't even seem to have the strength to struggle, only moving his body slightly. The black-clothed man walked forward, and without saying a word, he swiped at Lu Chen's throat. It seemed that he didn't want to drag things out any longer, and wanted to kill directly for revenge. But at this moment, the forest suddenly darkened. The black-clothed man's hand subconsciously slowed, only to see a shadow suddenly surge from the front, flying into the air, filled with murderous intent, especially an unimaginably thick smell of blood. In the darkness, 2 dark green and cold lights swept past, like eerie but transparent gems, and also like the coldest ghost fire in the depths of the Yellow Springs, surging forward. The name of a huge monster blocked the black-clothed man's vision, leaving him with only darkness. The black-clothed man screamed, his heart was torn apart, but in front of such a terrifying beast and a sudden sneak attack, he even lost the strength to fight back, and could only subconsciously reach out to cover his head. A fishy wind swept past, and the black-clothed man's body trembled, his whole body cold, but in the next moment, he suddenly froze, only to find that he didn't seem to be injured. Looking up, he saw that the incomparably ferocious and terrifying monster that pounced from the darkness, that momentum like a mountain, actually pounced on empty air. In the dark mountain forest, a huge demonic beast appeared. It was shaped like a wolf, and its body was completely black. Its 2 huge eyes flickered with a cold and dark green light. It looked like a demonic wolf that had walked out from hell. But just now, that seemingly thunderous and murderous attack, this black wolf did not know why, after falling, it actually pounced a foot away from the black-clothed man, pouncing on empty air. The black wolf beast seemed to be a bit stunned. After a moment, it suddenly roared, looking a bit angry. Its 2 eyes shone with green light. It turned around and slapped the black-clothed man with its claws. Immediately, the black-clothed man's blood spurted out. Before he could react, the ferocious and terrifying beast had already pounced on him and knocked him to the ground. Then with a terrible roar and the sound of flesh tearing, the black-clothed man screamed a few times, and then there was no more sound. In the air of the forest, there was a bit of a bloody smell. Everything slowly quieted down. The black wolf stared at the dead man on the ground a few times, then turned around and walked to the side of Lu Chen, its 2 eyes flashing with cold light. A terrible wolf mouth that was still dripping blood came over, as if it wanted to make a move on Lu Chen. Lu Chen's body moved a bit, then slowly turned over, still lying on the ground powerlessly. Facing the sky, he gasped for breath. The terrible wolf face appeared in his line of sight, especially the pair of snow-white sharp fangs that protruded out of the mouth, seemed to be colder and sharper than all the blades in this world. Lu Chen quietly looked at this black wolf, suddenly laughed. His laughter was not loud. When he laughed, it also seemed to be very painful, but in his laughter, there was a trace of warmth and gratification, mixed with a little pain. It was like in this dark and cold night, he finally came into contact with a trace of warm light. Lu Chen coughed with a trace of pain, but he smiled at this fierce monster and said, "Hey, stupid dog, I saw your stupid look just now." How? The black wolf monster roared, bared its teeth, and its hair stood up. It seemed to be instantly enraged, wanting to bite this man's throat in one bite. Chapter 245. Black Wolf stared fiercely at the man who looked like he was about to die. He bared his fangs, as if he was considering whether he should bite off this fellow's neck and silence him. Lu Chen was still smiling. He barely raised his right hand and patted Black Wolf's face. "Let's go. I don't know how many pursuers are behind us." Hei Lang growled in a low voice. He still looked a little dissatisfied, but his eyes quickly softened. The original coldness was gone, replaced by a hint of concern and anxiety.
It lowered its huge head and extended it to Lu Chen's side, as if it wanted to push him up. However, Lu Chen struggled twice but was still unable to get up. Seeing that Lu Chen seemed to be at the end of his rope, Black Wolf panicked. He whimpered and used his head to gently nudge Lu Chen's body. Then he lay down beside him, probably urging him to climb onto his back. Lu Chen lay sprawled on the ground, panting heavily. His face was frighteningly pale. He looked like an exhausted dead dog. Black Wolf waited for a while. Seeing that Lu Chen was still motionless, he could not help but let out a low growl. After hesitating for a moment, Black Dragon suddenly stood up and bit towards Lu Chen. He bit the upper part of Lu Chen's arm and suddenly flung it. With a whoosh, a huge force came over. Lu Chen's entire body was involuntarily flung up. At the same time, several wounds on his body burst open again, causing Lu Chen to let out a muffled groan. The muscles on his face twisted, and in the next moment, his entire body was lying on Black Wolf's broad back. The soft but tough black fur carried a trace of warmth. In this cold night, there was a reassuring warmth. Black Wolf looked back at him, as if he was worried. Lu Chen panted for a moment. Even though there was blood at the corner of his mouth, he still laughed softly and said, "Well done. You can go now." The Black Wolf growled in a low voice before turning around and walking away. The forest in front of him was deep, and the shadows of the mountains were heavy in the distance. It had only taken 2 steps when Lu Chen, who was on its back, suddenly whispered, "Don't go back. Kunlun Mountain can no longer accommodate us." Hei Lang's footsteps came to a halt. Its eyes were filled with doubt, but it did not question Lu Chen's words. However, it still howled at the majestic mountain in the distance, as if it was pointing at something. Lu Chen suddenly became silent. He lay on Black Wolf's back, his head buried deep, his hands hanging weakly by Black Wolf's side. There was a hint of indifference in the air. Black Wolf seemed to be a little uneasy, and kept turning his head to look at Lu Chen. After a while, Lu Chen said in a low voice, "There's no need to look for Xianxia. Dead." Roar! A terrifying howl suddenly burst forth from the Black Wolf's mouth. A dark green and cold flame instantly appeared in its huge eyes that had recovered. It was like a burning flame. It suddenly raised its head and stared at the deep night and the distant mountain in front of it. Killing intent was like a tide, emanating from the giant beast, as if it wanted to tear everything in front of it to shreds. It suddenly took a step forward, as if it was about to rush into the darkness in the distance. A hand covered in blood gently blocked its path. A moment later, Lu Chen's voice sounded in Black Wolf's ears. It seemed to carry a trace of calmness. "There's no need to go. I've already avenged her." Hei Lang's front foot paused in mid-air, and after a while, it slowly retracted it. It turned its huge wolf head and stared at Lu Chen with its terrifying green and murderous eyes. Lu Chen had no intention of avoiding it, and only nodded lightly at the giant wolf. The dark green flame slowly calmed down and was replaced by an indescribable deep sorrow. The huge black wolf was silent. It stood where it was for a long time. It was as if many scenes from the past flashed past its eyes. In the valley of the land of chaos, there was a girl who was smiling like a flower. She hugged it and pouted her lips carefully. Her warm embrace, her kind smile, and her long-winded nagging. She was always smiling, she was always gentle, and she was always a little stupid. Even when they broke up, she would go the wrong way. But the night was so cold, the world was so cruel, and when the lives that should have died finally struggled to survive in her hands, the light fell on their hearts. Hei Lang carried Lu Chen on its back, slowly turned around, and walked in another direction, towards the south where its back was facing the tall mountain. The mountain forest was silent, and darkness and silence shrouded the surroundings. Lu Chen silently lay on its back, one man and one wolf, gradually walking away. But just as they were about to walk into the darkness, suddenly, that black wolf turned around, its huge eyes wide open, staring at the dark world, and let out an incomparably mournful howl. The howl spread far away, reverberating between the heaven and earth, reverberating in the night wind, and gradually fading away, as if it was a memory of the past. Then, they finally walked into the darkness, disappearing into the distance. On the majestic Kunlun Mountain, it was now deep in the night. On the heavenly Kuan Peak, in the solemn and majestic Zhangyang Hall, Taoist Chen Deng finished his last task, and stood up from the spacious main seat. The chair was extremely spacious and looked very imposing. The wood used to make it was the extremely rare bloodwing sandalwood. It was a 4-vein top-grade spirit wood and was priceless. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was one of the most precious chairs in the world. Only a famous sect like the Kunlun party, which had been passed down for 5,000 years and had never been severed, could possibly have such a profound heritage and such a treasure. As the highly respected Yuanying spiritual master of the Kunlun party, Daoist Qian Deng naturally knew the origin of this blood-winged sandalwood throne, and also knew that in the long years of the past, only the spiritual masters of the Kunlun party had the qualifications to sit on this chair. He had wanted to sit on this chair for a very, very long time. But today, when he really sat on it, he didn't feel particularly comfortable. The chair seemed a bit too hard. Although the blood-winged sandalwood was a top-grade spiritual wood, and could nourish spiritual power and calm the mind, this kind of spiritual wood naturally carried a different kind of strange smell. It wasn't a fishy smell, but a very strange smell. Some people liked it, and some people hated it. Daoist Qian Deng didn't like this smell, so he didn't like this chair either. But he liked the feeling of sitting on this chair very much. So when he stood up, he couldn't help but gently stroke the armrest next to him. He then revealed a satisfied smile, turned around, and walked into the rear hall of Zhangyang Hall. Although the night was dark, the side hall behind Zhangyang Hall was still brightly lit. But at this time, the many revered Yuanying spiritual masters that gathered in the hall had all disappeared. When Daoist Qian Deng walked into the hall, he only saw 2 people. One was the bald fatty true Lord Tianlan, who was sitting in the seat of honor, and the other was Zhuoxian, who was standing respectfully to his side. Daoist Qian Deng glanced at Zhuoxian indifferently with a hint of disdain in his eyes, but it quickly disappeared and was replaced with a respectful and warm expression. He walked up to true Lord Tianlan and bowed, saying, "Uncle Master, I've come." True Lord Tianlan opened his eyes and looked at Daoist Qian Deng. He smiled and said, "Qian Deng, you've come. Sit down and talk." "Yes." Daoist Qian Deng thanked him and immediately sat down on the left side of true Lord Tianlan. This chair gave him a very familiar and comfortable feeling, especially when compared to the blood-winged sandalwood throne from before. This chair had been placed in this hall for many years, and he had also sat on it for many years. It had always been a position above everyone else and below only one person. For some reason, when he sat here tonight, there was a strange feeling in his heart. It was as if he felt that something was different from before. This subtle emotion flashed through Daoist Master Qian Deng's mind, but he didn't show it on his face. At the same time, Daoist Master Qianlan's voice sounded in his ears. "Have you finished dealing with the matters outside?" Daoist Qian Deng bowed slightly and nodded. "Yes, the sect is now stable. Many disciples are in their positions and there is nothing out of the ordinary." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. "Qian Deng, you've contributed greatly to the stable situation after the great change." Daoist Qian Deng smiled. "It's all thanks to you, Uncle Master, that our Kunlun sect is able to remain calm in the face of danger." True Lord Tianlan pondered for a moment and then asked, "How is idle month?" Daoist Qian Deng paused for a moment and subconsciously glanced at Zhuoxian, who was standing on the opposite side. At this moment, Zhuoxian happened to look at him as well, as if this question had touched him. Their gazes met in the air for a moment and then moved away. Daoist Qian Deng respectfully said to true Lord Tianlan, "Senior brother sect master is seriously injured and can't handle matters. For the sake of his cultivation and longevity, he had no choice but to go into seclusion in his cave abode. I'm afraid he won't be able to come out for the next 10 years. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded before sighing all of a sudden. Junior niece Xianyu is my senior brother's favorite disciple and he had high hopes for her. It's a pity that she didn't want to meet with such a calamity." Daoist Qian Deng and Zhuoxian both looked down at the ground and didn't reply. After a moment, true Lord Tianlan said to Daoist Qian Deng, "You've been busy for the whole day. Go and rest. I'm afraid you'll be busy for the next few days. Thank you for your hard work." Daoist Qian Deng hurriedly stood up and said, "Uncle Master, you flatter me. This is what I should do. In fact, I'm not very capable. Ever since I was appointed as the acting sect master, I've always been afraid that I won't be able to do my job well and let down the ancestors' and Uncle Master's trust. In fact, if Uncle Master is free, on behalf of the 100,000 disciples in the sect, Qian Deng earnestly asks Uncle Master Qian Deng to take this position." Our Kunlun sect will be able to rise again and regain the glory of our ancestors. Zhuoxian frowned slightly and glanced at Taoist Chen Deng. True Lord Tianlan was silent for a moment and then revealed a faint smile. He looked at Taoist Chen Deng and said, "Are you serious?" Taoist Chen Deng's heart suddenly skipped a beat and a chill appeared in his body. Chapter 246. There was a moment of silence in the hall. Taoist Master Chen Deng couldn't help but sneak a glance at True Lord Tianlan. He saw that the tall and sturdy man on the main seat had a gentle smile on his face. He looked benevolent and kind as he stared at him. After a moment, Taoist Master Chen Deng respectfully said, "I am not lying." True Lord Tianlan suddenly laughed and pointed at Taoist Master Chen Deng. He then turned to Zhuoxian and said, "Look, Chen Deng is such a humble person. He really doesn't care about fame and fortune." Zhuoxian smiled and nodded. "That is true. I have always admired senior brother Chen Deng's noble character." Taoist Master Chen Deng smiled and nodded at Zhuoxian. His eyes also softened. At this time, True Lord Tianlan said, "There are many complicated matters in the sect. I also have a lot of things to do in the Immortal Alliance, so it is better that you take this seat." Taoist Master Chen Deng's heart relaxed, but his face still showed some fear and trepidation. He spoke for a while more before taking his leave. Watching Taoist Master Chen Deng's departing figure, the smile on True Lord Tianlan's face gradually faded. When the figure of the current acting sect master of the Kunlun party disappeared from his sight, True Lord Tianlan's face was already indifferent and calm. It was quiet in the side hall. Zhuoxian stood silently at the side, his eyes looking at his nose looking at his heart. After an unknown amount of time, no one spoke in the hall. Zhuoxian's body didn't move at all, but a faint trace of cold sweat seeped out of his forehead. Just when the sudden cold atmosphere was about to suffocate everyone, Perfected Lord Tianlan, who was sitting on the main seat, broke the silence and said, "Xianxia is your senior brother. Aren't you going to see him?" When Zhuoxian heard this person's voice, he let out a breath with great difficulty. However, after hearing these words, his relaxed heart instantly tightened again. He didn't dare to have the slightest hesitation and said, "I didn't go to see him." "Senior brother Xian, you didn't see the big picture and didn't judge people well. There have long been complaints in the sect. Now that he's in seclusion to recuperate, Martial Uncle is showing him mercy. I thank Martial Uncle on behalf of Senior Idol Month." Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression was indifferent, as though he didn't react to Zhuoxian's flattery. Instead, after pondering for a moment, he suddenly thought of something and said to Zhuoxian, "I remember that senior brother Bai Chen just took in a new final disciple a few days ago. She's a girl in her early teens and is extremely talented. Her name is White Lotus. Where is she now?" Zhuoxian's heart skipped a beat. He hurriedly bowed and replied, "Reporting to Martial Uncle, junior sister is young and playful. On the night of the full moon, she went down the winter peak by herself. I haven't seen her since then." Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned slightly before saying to Zhuoxian, "Senior brother Bai Chen has just passed away. How can his disciples not observe mourning in front of his coffin? Go find her and bring her back. Don't let senior brother's disciple wander outside the Kunlun party." Zhuoxian took a deep breath and felt his body turn slightly cold. However, he still replied respectfully, "Yes, I understand. I'll definitely bring her back." Perfected Lord Tianlan turned his gaze and stared at Zhuoxian for a moment before nodding. His expression eased up a little, as though he was about to say something. However, at that moment, there was a series of footsteps outside the side hall, followed by a clear voice. "Disciple He seeks an audience with Perfected Lord." Perfected Lord Tianlan glanced outside the door before nodding at Zhuoxian. Zhuoxian bowed and retreated. After walking to the door, he saw He standing a few feet away from the door, waiting patiently. Zhuoxian revealed a smile and nodded at He. He returned the smile and said, "Greetings, Uncle Master Zhua." Zhuoxian said, "Go in. Uncle Master Tianlan is inside." After saying that, the two of them brushed past each other. He took a deep breath, then strode forward and walked in with steady steps. "Disciple He greets Perfected Lord." He's voice seemed to be particularly steady and powerful, echoing in this secluded hall.
Perfected Lord Tianlong glanced at him with a faint smile on his face.
You're here. Sit down and talk.
Thank you, Perfected Lord. He sat down next to him with a respectful expression. Perfected Lord Tianlong said, You did very well this time.
I'm very satisfied. He hurriedly stood up to express his gratitude.
However, his expression still seemed a little unnatural at this time, probably because he thought of what he had done.
Tianlong waved his hand to indicate that he didn't need to be so polite.
After a moment of silence, He took a step forward and said, Perfected Lord, disciple came here today to report something to you.
I've just come back from Kunwu City.
Since last night, when we found many demons from the devil cult, our Kunlun disciples had a fierce battle with them.
Now, it can be said that we have a complete victory. But, speaking up to this point, he suddenly paused as if he was a little hesitant.
Perfected Lord Tianlong glanced at him and said, But what? He hesitated for a moment and said, But I heard that yesterday in Kunwu City, a demon from the devil cult with a strange black fire attacked the Su family and killed many people, including the beloved son of the Su family's master, Sumo.
He also injured junior martial sister Su Qingjun.
Perfected Lord Tianlong's expression was still indifferent.
It was impossible to tell whether he was happy or angry. He just said calmly, It seems that this demon isn't weak.
He said, That's right.
After an investigation, it was found that he was a spy who sneaked into our Kunlun sect. He was a part-time disciple called Lu Chen.
Perfected Lord Tianlong's eyes flashed and he said, This person is so cunning.
He nodded and said, That's right. We chased after this person, but he is sinister and cunning. We don't know how he escaped from Kunwu City, but he also injured several of our disciples along the way. Now, according to the last news we received, he has probably escaped to the south. The south. Perfected Lord Tianlong murmured.
A moment later he said, Could it be that he escaped to the disorienting land?
He said, That should be it. The disorienting land is the most chaotic place in the world. It's dangerous and unpredictable. Throughout history, there have been countless desperados and ferocious villains who have fled there when they have nowhere else to go. At the same time, there are also many remnants of the devil cult there. Presumably, that thief also went there.
Perfected Lord Tianlong was silent for a moment and said, I heard that there were many demons from the devil cult inside and outside Kunwu City last night.
Why did you only pay attention to this person?
He said with emotion, Perfected Lord, this person has been lurking in our Kunlun sect for a long time and has done countless evil deeds in secret.
Now, he has even killed and injured our disciples, which can be said to be a heinous crime.
Disciple is untalented, but I'm willing to personally go to the disorienting land to kill this person and take his life to comfort the souls of our fellow disciples who have sacrificed themselves.
A sharp light flashed across Perfected Lord Tianlong's eyes. The light at that moment seemed especially dazzling and almost as sharp as a knife. However, he just finished speaking and was lowering his head, so he didn't see this fleeting scene. Perfected Lord Tianlong didn't speak right away.
Instead, he pondered for a moment and said with a calm expression, I didn't expect you to be so courageous.
It's rare in the sect. But I have a feeling that you probably have something to say to me, right? Suddenly, he bent his knees and knelt down in front of Perfected Lord Tianlong. He kowtowed and said in a deep voice, Perfected Lord, please forgive me.
I have an audacious and presumptuous request.
Please allow me to state it, Perfected Lord.
Perfected Lord Tianlong said indifferently, Speak.
He didn't raise his head and was still kneeling on the ground. With his head touching the cold ground he said, Disciple is speaking nonsense. I sincerely hope that Perfected Lord will be merciful and accept he as your disciple. Perfected Lord Tianlong's eyes narrowed slightly. After a while, he slowly stood up with his hands behind his back.
He didn't reprimand he who was kneeling on the ground and didn't dare to raise his head, nor did he ask him to get up in a pleasant manner.
He merely paced back and forth on the spot in silence. He's body didn't move at all. At this moment, no one knew what he was thinking. However, looking at how he was kneeling on the ground and prostrating himself, it seemed like he was ready to risk everything.
Perfected Lord Tianlong took another 2 steps and said indifferently, You want me to accept you as my disciple?
He said in a deep voice, That's right. Disciple knows that Perfected Lord has yet to accept a disciple and that he doesn't have a teacher now. Disciple has admired and worshipped Perfected Lord for many years and has always hated that I can't serve Perfected Lord. Today, there might be a chance, so Disciple wants to come and plead with Perfected Lord no matter what. Perfected Lord Tianlong raised his eyes slightly but shifted his gaze from He to the door of the hall. The darkness of the night was boundless, as if the whole world was dark and shadows were everywhere. He seemed to be in a trance. After a while he said, I am Perfected Lord, not everyone can be my disciple. He kowtowed a few times and said, Yes. Disciples' talent and comprehension are considered to be above average in our sect. If Perfected Lord accepts me, I will definitely train hard day and night without slacking off or tarnish your reputation. Other than that, Disciple is going to the chaotic land to hunt down the evil cult spies because I want to show what I have learned to you. Although I don't dare to boast that I am invincible in the world, I will definitely not disappoint you. A glimmer flashed across Perfected Lord Tianlong's eyes. He then turned around and walked back to his seat. At the moment he turned around, there seemed to be a subtle self-deprecating smile on his face, but it disappeared in a blink of an eye. He said, So you are going to the chaotic land because of this? He did not answer but kowtowed and said, Please accept me, Perfected Lord. Disciple is infatuated and incomparably firm. If there is a chance in the future, Disciple is even more willing to inherit the Tian character Taoist title and inherit Perfected Lord's legacy. Perfected Lord Tianlong's footsteps suddenly stopped. He stood still for a moment and his voice suddenly became much deeper. He said, You still want my Tian character Taoist title? He gritted his teeth and said, Please grant me my wish, Perfected Lord. Perfected Lord Tianlong was silent for a long time with an indifferent expression, as if no one could tell what he was thinking. After a long time, he suddenly waved his sleeves and walked out. When he passed by He, who was still kneeling on the ground, he said indifferently, We will talk about this after you go to the chaotic land and kill that person. Chapter 247. There was no one left in the quiet forest. There was only the mess left after the intense battle and 3 lifeless corpses lying in the forest. Among the 3 corpses, 2 of them were the devil cult's disciples who were dressed entirely in black, while the last one was the Kunlun sect's disciple who was the first to rush over here to kill Lu Chen. However, the 3 of them had collapsed at a place that was about the same distance away, yet they were emitting a similar stench of blood. A gust of wind blew through the forest, bringing with it a faint aura. After a while, there was a sudden whistling sound coming from afar. Not long after, it arrived nearby. After a gust of wind swept past, several figures appeared. They were all people dressed in black. The 3 corpses on the ground entered their line of sight immediately. Someone immediately let out a cry of shock. Then, a few people quickly went forward to check. The remaining people had cautious looks in their eyes. They held their weapons and guarded their surroundings, carefully looking into the dark depths of the forest around them. In the end, these black-clothed men were certain that the people on the ground were already dead. There was no way to save them anymore. Each of them stood up with an unpleasant expression. It seemed that one of them, who was hot-tempered, even used his leg to kick the dead Kunlun disciple as he cursed. A strange wind blew past. 2 figures descended from the sky and landed on the ground. They were Fan Tue and Chen He. When the surrounding black-robed men saw them, they all bowed and paid their respects. Fan Tue nodded his head slightly. Then, he walked to the side of the 3 corpses with Chen He and squatted down to examine them. A strange expression appeared on his face. He wanted to say something but stopped himself. Instead, he extended his hand and waved at the surrounding black-robed men. The rest of the black-robed men quickly walked away without a word, leaving only Fan Tue and Chen He at their original spot. Only then did Fan Tue look at Chen He. He had a look of surprise on his face. He said to Chen He, What kind of magical technique did this guy use? Why is it so strange? Chen He also had a serious expression. His gaze swept past the wounds on the corpses in front of him. He said softly, I have never seen this before either. Fan Tue thought for a moment and said, You said that this person is very likely to be the traitor from the Battle of the Desolate Valley 10 years ago. It is said that that person was the proud disciple of Elder Yun Shouyang before he rebelled. Could it be that this is also a mysterious technique that is secretly passed down in our holy church? Chen He shook his head and said, It doesn't seem like it. At least, I've never seen or heard of the holy church having such a strange black flame devil skill. However, these traces seem to be similar to the witchcraft of some southern barbarians in the land of chaos.
Fan Tue furrowed his brows and said, "Does this mean that we have misjudged him?"
Chen He clapped his hands and stood up. A cold smile appeared on his face as he said, "There should be no mistake. No matter what, it is a joyous occasion to be able to discover this traitor. It is also a blessing from the ancestors of the Holy Church. As long as we can kill this traitor, we will be able to comfort the countless brothers of our sect who have died tragically over the past 10 years. If we don't kill him, if we don't tear this person into 1,000 pieces, it will truly be difficult to vent the hatred in my heart."
Fan Tue nodded his head and said, "That is indeed the case."
"Then let's continue the chase. That traitor should already be injured. He won't be able to escape quickly." Chen He agreed and walked forward with Fan Tue. Not long after, they walked into the darkness. The group of black-clothed people behind them also quickly followed. Occasionally, someone would sigh regretfully and look back. No one cared about the 3 people who had died on the ground.
Perhaps in the future, they would silently rot in the forest like this, turning into dust and returning to this vast forest, becoming a part of the earth between the heavens and the earth. However, not long after they left, a petite white figure suddenly appeared in this dark forest. An extremely beautiful young lady appeared from the darkness. She first looked in the direction that the Devil Sect members had left in. After confirming that there was indeed no one lying in ambush there, she lowered her head and began to observe the 3 corpses. However, what was strange was that she was not concerned about the Kunlun disciple, nor was she concerned about the person who was wielding the long sword that Chen He and Fan Tue had been examining. Instead, after calmly looking at the 2 people beside her, this young lady's entire attention was on the Devil Sect disciple who was originally wielding the flying hoop.
There were no traces of the black flame curse on this person's corpse. Instead, there were a number of large bone-deep wounds that cut across his body, causing one's hair to stand on end. It was as if a terrifying beast had pounced on him and wreaked havoc, leaving behind a bloody wound that was too horrible to look at.
This beautiful young lady did not look old, but she did not show the slightest hint of fear in the face of such a terrifying wound.
Instead, she observed the person's chest with unusual calmness. After taking a closer look, the young lady's expression suddenly turned serious. She stood up and let out a cold grunt.
Then she muttered to herself, "That black dog has indeed advanced to become a holy beast.
I knew that my guess was right." As she spoke, her eyes darted around, as if she was thinking about something. She was a little hesitant. After a moment, she turned her head to look at the Kunlun mountain in the distance.
Then, she turned her head to look at the even further south.
After comparing the 2, she suddenly twisted her lips and walked toward the south. It was almost exactly the same direction that Lu Chen had fled in a few hours ago when he was still here. The huge black wolf galloped through the cold and dark night. Its speed was extremely fast, almost like the wind. However, the thick and broad back of this black wolf was unusually stable. Coupled with the soft wolf fur and the warmth that came from under its skin, it made Lu Chen feel as if he had arrived at the most beautiful place in the world. Even though the night was still endless, Lu Chen himself did not know where he was going. However, if he were to head south, he had a rough idea of where he would be heading. It would be nothing more than entering the disorienting lands. There were many people who went to the disorienting lands. Apart from the countless low-level rogue cultivators, there were also many disciples of various sects who had a strong background and divine powers. The disorienting lands was also the hometown of the black dog. The huge black wolf that was carrying Lu Chen on its back was, of course, the black dog. It originally had a powerful bloodline. After Lu Chen had cast a strange spell in the mysterious tree hole, Atsu suddenly erupted with all kinds of signs of power. At the last moment, after the strange full moon, it obtained the power of the full moon and broke through the records of the holy beasts in the southern barbarian tribes. In the process of advancing, Atsu obtained great power. At the same time, its powerful bloodline also displayed great primitive power under the rare moonlight. Almost all of the wounds on Atsu's body had healed. However, the most surprising thing was that the black dog could see again in one of its eyes that had been damaged. It could see again. Atsu's power had skyrocketed by 10 times.
Even its body had become unusually large, filled with a strong sense of power.
Lu Chen had never seen a so-called holy beast before. He only knew a little about the advancement of holy beasts. However, when this huge black wolf appeared in front of him, Lu Chen could almost recognize it at first glance. It was Atsu. Atsu also recognized him. When it saw that Lu Chen's body was covered with wounds and he looked like a lamp that was about to run out of oil, Atsu looked very anxious. However, in the end, it still brought Lu Chen away from this place. As he ran south, the wind howled. Lu Chen watched the darkness around him recede into the distance. He felt like he was swimming to the shore in the sea. However, he knew that it was just an illusion. The Kunlun Party and the Devil Cult, these two great forces, were not willing to let him go. There was no longer a place for him in this world. Perhaps, only the chaotic and dangerous disorientated lands would be his final home. Lu Chen suddenly thought of the things he had done in the disorientated lands 10 years ago. The corners of his mouth curled into a bitter smile. He did not expect that after more than 10 years, he would once again go to that disgusting place. The black wolf's bulging muscles were like a horned dragon. Every muscle showed the unbelievable power in this black wolf's body. However, this did not stop more people who wanted his life. The assassins arrived very quickly, including some disciples from the famous sections. After Lu Chen managed to deal with a group of people, he could only order Atsu to run into the forest instead of using the wide official road. This move was indeed effective. After entering the forest, the few Kunlun disciples behind them did not catch up. Instead, the devil cult assassins came one after another. However, the current Atsu was no longer the same as before. After absorbing the full moon essence, its power had increased greatly. It was possible that it was now a very powerful mutt in the vast land of the divine boat. This so-called powerful was because when they hid in the forest, Atsu would secretly lurk in the darkness for a while. Then after a while, when it came back, Lu Chen saw something at the edge of Atsu's mouth. It even carried a faint smell of blood. That was a certain part of the body of the assassins who were chasing after them. On about the 7th day, Lu Chen and Atsu, who had been trekking over mountains and rivers, suddenly saw a familiar scene in their memories. It was the Dragon and Tiger Mountains, side by side. Between the two mountains, there was a long and narrow passage that extended deep inside. Far away in the distance was the world's most dangerous place, the disorientated lands, which made all the cultivators in the world change their expressions at the mention of it. Lu Chen's body was originally like a lamp that had run out of oil. But after these 7 days of fleeing, the toughness of his body was once again displayed. He actually started to slowly recover his vitality. But when they started to walk towards the Dragon and Tiger Mountains, preparing to enter the passage and enter the disorientated lands, Lu Chen, who was still sitting on Hei Lang Atsu, suddenly sat up straight and then used his hand to lightly pat Atsu's head. Atsu immediately obediently stopped. Lu Chen looked ahead. His expression suddenly became somewhat ugly. He saw that in front of him on the passage between the valleys, there was actually a lady standing there. Her appearance was charming and beautiful. Her figure was exquisite and graceful. The front of her clothes seemed to be unbuttoned, faintly revealing some snow-white fullness. It actually had a kind of charm that could hook one's soul. But what was even more strange was, on that lady's face, there was a grave and stern expression. Even in that bright gaze, there was a bit of cold murderous intent. Just like that, she looked towards Lu Chen. Chapter 248. After fleeing for so many days, Lu Chen's injuries still hadn't fully healed. However, compared to when he had just escaped from Kunwa City, he was already much better. At the very least, he could now walk with some difficulty. However, ever since the Black Wolf Atsu advanced on the night of the full moon, it seemed as if it had changed completely. From day to night, it seemed as if it had endless energy and didn't feel anything while carrying Lu Chen on its back. Thus, Lu Chen simply used it as a mount all the way to the south. However, aside from the fact that Atsu sometimes ran too fast and was a bit bumpy, having such a mighty and domineering big black wolf as a mount was indeed very impressive and convenient. In fact, the reason why Lu Chen's injuries were able to recover so quickly was largely due to the fact that Atsu carried him all the way. Not only did it avoid most of the pursuers, it also saved him a lot of energy. However, now that they were in front of the Dragon and Tiger Mountains, they could enter the land of confusion through the canyon. Although it wasn't like they could fly freely in the sky and swim freely in the vast sea, it was still safer in the chaotic and dangerous land of confusion. However, at this moment, the woman who appeared in the narrow and long path in the canyon looked rather frail. She stood in the middle of the path and blocked the only path between the two mountains. Lu Chen jumped down from Atsu's back and slowly walked to the entrance of the canyon with Atsu following behind him. At this moment, the black wolf's body was abnormally huge. Just standing there, it seemed as if it wasn't much shorter than Lu Chen. With a pair of large wolf eyes and a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth, it was extremely imposing.
It could be said that it was ferocious as it glared fiercely at the woman in front of it.
Lu Chen raised his head to look around and frowned slightly. He had lived in Crescent City for a period of time, so he wasn't unfamiliar with the area around Dragon and Tiger Mountains. If he remembered correctly, this small path in the valley was usually not so quiet. Even though there weren't many people here, it was common to see people coming and going.
However, at this moment, apart from him and the woman who blocked the way, there was no one else in front of and behind the Dragon and Tiger Mountains.
At this moment, the tall mountains were covered with green trees and vines. Occasionally, the cries of apes and birds could be heard. This was the only sound in this place. Everything was cold and cheerless to the point it was slightly unusual.
Lu Chen's gaze once again descended onto the woman. He was just about to speak when his gaze suddenly focused because he saw a red-colored jade embedded on the woman's chest where the collar that stuck closely to her fair skin.
It was shaped like an aureole, and its color was bright red and gorgeous. It looked lifelike, and it actually seemed as if it would flap its wings and soar into the sky. Lu Chen took a deep breath. His expression suddenly became serious. Looking at this woman, his voice also became deeper. Xueying. Xueying was a woman's nickname. Her real name was Xueying. She was the current leader of Fuyunji in Zhengxianmeng. In Zhengxianmeng, where cultivators were as numerous as the rain and experts were as numerous as the clouds, those who could hold the position of a division and a hall's leader were not simple people, not to mention Fuyunji, this kind of frontline hall that had been fighting tit for tat with the evil faction all year round, attacking each other and killing each other. Xueying became the leader of Fuyunji 10 years ago. Her identity and origin had always been mysterious. Her master skills, supernatural powers, magical weapons and so on were all mysteries. Outsiders only knew that this woman had a seductive and beautiful appearance, but her way of doing things was very experienced. She was strict with her subordinates and even more ruthless to her enemies. Over the years, the number of evil faction disciples that died in Fuyunji's hands was uncountable. Furthermore, it was said that within the evil faction, there was an assassination list that recorded the enemies of the evil faction that they had a blood feud with. They were the enemies that the evil faction would kill at all costs, and Xueying was ranked third on this assassination list. Other than that, Xueying herself was also a rather legendary woman in Zhengxianmeng. Because of her high cultivation and natural beauty, coupled with her high position, she attracted the attention of countless people. Of course, there were also those who coveted her. But over the years, Xueying had always kept people at a distance, treating almost everyone with the same indifference. Of course, this was a very offensive way of doing things. Of course, if someone really coveted her beauty, no matter how much she feigned civility, as long as she didn't go to bed with him, she would still offend him. This was a very common thing in the cultivation world where male cultivators were the majority. But compared to other female cultivators, although Xueying had always been a maverick, she did not suffer any setbacks because of this. The biggest reason for this was that she actually had a huge and powerful backer behind her, and that was Supreme Lord Tianlan. Fuyunji was a sect that Supreme Lord Tianlan had single-handedly established, and he had never allowed any outsiders to interfere. Over the years, Xueying had even become the #1 general under Supreme Lord Tianlan's command in Zhengxianmeng. No one dared to provoke her because they were afraid of hurting her. Lu Chen had never seen this legendary woman in Zhengxianmeng, but he had once lived in seclusion for 10 years with the help of Fuyunji, so of course he had heard some things about Fuyunji. He had also heard some stories about Xueying, especially about her appearance, which had been described countless times in the legends. And when he called out the two words, Xueying, the woman's gaze also fell on his face. Her eyes were very bright, and just like the legend said, because they were too bright, they seemed a bit fierce, as if they could see through a person's flesh and go straight to their heart with a single glance. And after looking at Lu Chen for a moment, the woman also opened her mouth and said, Lu Chen. Lu Chen was slightly surprised and said, You know me? Xueying stared at him and said, You are the greatest shadow of my Fuyunji in the past 10 years, how could I not know you? Lu Chen's expression changed slightly, then he took a deep breath and looked at Xueying. For a while, the two did not speak, faintly facing each other on this valley path. After a while, Lu Chen said, Please make way, I want to go over. Shueying had no intention of making way.
She calmly looked at Lu Chen and suddenly said, "Do you know that the fate of a shadow is to never see the light in this life?"
Lu Chen didn't say anything.
Shueying continued, "What you did in Kunwu City was the same as bringing about your own destruction, do you know that?"
Lu Chen glanced at her, but he still remained silent. Shueying's expression was calm. No emotions could be seen on her face. It seemed that from the beginning to the end, she was just calmly narrating some things. She said, "I don't care if you don't want to live, but you hid in Fuyunji for 10 years. Have you ever thought about what will happen to the people who have taken care of you all these years? The devil cult will definitely pursue you relentlessly. If they catch you, my subordinates will probably be dragged into this mess." Shueying looked at Lu Chen and said, "If that's the case, I feel that since you're already in a hopeless situation, you might as well die earlier. What do you think?"
Lu Chen suddenly smiled and said, "You want me to die?"
Shueying said, "I think it's better for you to die than to live. At least you won't be a burden to others." Her eyes suddenly became a bit colder, looking as cold as a frosty blade. She said, "In any case, you've already caused the deaths of many people, right?" Lu Chen's expression instantly became cold. It seemed that these words still stung him. This woman, Shueying, was indeed as sharp as the rumor said. However, he still endured it. After a moment, he indifferently said, "You're in charge of Fuyunji, so I think you should know my identity and background." Shueying sneered and said, "Of course I know. A few years ago, I even went to Qingshui village to secretly see you." Lu Chen was startled. He didn't have any impression of this woman in his memory. Presumably, Shueying had been spying on him without his knowledge. This gave him a strange feeling. However, now was not the time to think about these things. He looked at Shueying and said, "You came here to stop me. Was it his idea?" Who he was, Lu Chen didn't say, and Shueying didn't ask either. However, they both seemed to know in their hearts. Shueying only shook her head and said, "Now that things have come to this, even Fuyunji can't protect you from publicly using evil arts in the big city. We can only say that it has nothing to do with you. Even for the sake of our own Fengyu, after today, we might even arrange for people to come and kill you. Do you understand?" Lu Chen's expression was normal. He nodded and said, "I understand, I don't blame you." Shueying snorted, looking somewhat disdainful. However, the originally sharp gaze in the depths of her eyes seemed to have softened a little. Then, she took a step to the side and opened up half of the path. She said, "You can go. In the future, if you're found by the evil sex demons, before you get caught, I advise you to kill yourself." Lu Chen strode forward, Atsu following closely behind him. As he walked past Shueying, Lu Chen's footsteps suddenly stopped. Atsu also quickly noticed and immediately stopped. Then, it bared its teeth and stared at Shueying with incomparable ferocity. Being stared at by such a murderous beast as if it wanted to devour someone, it really made one's heart palpitate. However, Shueying didn't seem to feel anything. Instead, she focused her gaze and stared back at Atsu. That gaze seemed to be even more ferocious and savage than the black wolf. It was as if in the next moment, this woman was prepared to skin the black wolf and cook it into a big pot of hot soup. Moreover, her aura instantly surged and actually directly suppressed Atsu. Atsu let out a whimper and jumped away in shock. As a demonic beast, its sensitivity to the strong far surpassed that of a human's. Atsu immediately ran forward, and in a single breath, he ran several zhang away before stopping. Then, with a lingering fear, he turned his head back and looked around. Lu Chen's expression didn't change. He only stood in front of Shueying and stared at her. Shueying turned her gaze from Atsu and looked at him calmly. "What is it?" Lu Chen said, "I think there's something wrong with what you said earlier." Shueying said, "Which one?" Lu Chen said, "Becoming a shadow, you will never see the light for the rest of your life." Shueying sneered and said, "Am I wrong?" Lu Chen was silent for a long time. Then, his voice became somewhat low. He said, "I have been in the darkness for several decades. I want to go to a place where there is light to live. I really want to know what that feels like." After saying this, he directly turned around and walked past this beautiful and charming woman who was as sharp as a knife without looking back. Shueying stared at his back without saying a word. At this time, a gust of wind seemed to rise, blowing across the valley. A strand of Shui Ying's hair swayed slightly in the wind. Chapter 249. After watching the man and wolf leave, Shui Ying still stood in the same place.
Her expression was plain and cold, as if Lu Chen's last words before he left had not touched her in the slightest.
The wind blew through the gorge, and the trees on both sides of the mountain swayed. She was the only one left in the vast mountain range. After a while, a red shadow suddenly swept out from the mountain forest on her left. It descended from the sky, made a turn in the air, and landed lightly next to Shui Ying.
"Sister Ying, why did you let him go?"
The one who spoke was a woman dressed in red. Her features were picturesque, and she was also extremely beautiful. However, compared to Shui Ying's flirtatious and sharp beauty, this woman in red was a little less fierce, but more passionate. Even when she asked Shui Ying a question with some doubt, her face still had a somewhat passionate feeling, just like the red clothes she wore, bold and passionate. Shui Ying glanced at the woman in red, and her eyes clearly softened. However, she did not immediately answer her, and instead asked, "You think we shouldn't let him go?" "Of course," the woman in red said without hesitation. "This person has worked in our Fuyunji for many years. Let's not talk about how many people he knows, but he definitely knows some of our secrets. If he is captured by the evil cult, the consequences will be hard to control." Shui Ying was silent for a moment, but still shook her head, and said, "Black Wolf has made great contributions to our Fuyunji, no, to Xianxia and the entire righteous world. We can't treat him like those useless shadows who are just eating and waiting to die." The woman in red curled her lips, as if she did not agree. Shui Ying glanced at her and sighed and said, "You are still young, and have not experienced the bloody days of 10 years ago when the evil cult was still flourishing. You can't imagine it just by listening to stories." At this point, there seemed to be a trace of sadness on her face. She said softly, "No matter what, we still owe him." The lady in red appeared to be extremely respectful towards Shui Ying. Since Shui Ying had said so, she did not say anything more. Instead, after a moment of silence, she turned her head to look in the direction that Lu Chen had come from and said, "Since that is the case, the evil cult's pursuers who are chasing after Hei Lang will most likely be here soon. Should we leave or stay?" Shui Ying said indifferently, "You stay here and help him hold them off for 3 days." The red-clothed woman was stunned for a moment. She pulled on Shui Ying's sleeve and said, "Sister Ying, why did you give me this difficult task again?" "No, I want to go back to the immortal city with you." Shui Ying waved her hand and said, "Things have changed recently, so I won't be returning to the immortal city for now. I might have to go to the western continent's Kunlun mountain. There's no point in you following me. What's more, it's very difficult to defend a place now. There will be evil cult's demons coming to us. We can use this opportunity to cut off some of the evil cult's wings. I'll leave this matter to you." The red-clothed woman grunted. It seemed that she was not afraid of the bloody and murderous task that Shui Ying had given her. She had a calm expression on her face.
However, she quickly asked, "Then what about after this matter is finished?"
"Should I return to the immortal city first or go to the Kunlun mountain to find you?" Shui Ying hesitated for a moment and said, "You go to the disorienting land and follow Hei Lang."
The red-clothed woman was shocked and said, "Why?"
"Could it be that you want me to protect him?" Shui Ying shook her head and said, "That's not it. Just follow that person. No matter what happens, you don't need to do anything. I'll contact you after I go to the western continent. At that time, whether you leave or stay, or treat him, we'll see when the time comes." The red-clothed woman nodded, but her expression changed slightly. Shui Ying was a meticulous woman. After glancing at her, she said, "What's wrong?" The red-clothed woman hesitated for a moment and said, "Sister Ying, didn't you just say that we owe him? If that's the case, it's understandable that you want me to protect him. But why do I hear that last sentence of yours? It seems like it might be disadvantageous to him as well." Shui Ying fell silent and did not speak for a long time. Just when the red-clothed woman was a little worried that she had said something wrong, Shui Ying sighed and said, "Whether we owe him or not, it's not up to me to decide. Isn't it just a word from our superiors?" The red-clothed woman was slightly startled after hearing this.
Then, a trace of sympathy appeared on her face and she said in a low voice, If that's the case, then that man is really quite pitiful.
Shuang suddenly seemed to be a little dispirited.
She waved her hand and said, "Do your own thing."
After saying this, she turned around and walked out of the canyon.
Her speed seemed slow, but it was actually very fast.
Not long after, she had gone far away. The red-clothed woman was left standing there, but she looked around in high spirits. Then, she turned her head and looked into the depths of the canyon. In front of the canyon was the world's most dangerous place, the disorienting land. She suddenly smiled, as if she was a little more interested in that direction. Ever since they entered the disorienting land, Lu Chen suddenly felt the pressure on his body lighten a lot. Relying on his familiarity with the disorienting land, he led the black wolf Atsu and fled into the depths of the disorienting land. It had been several days since he sensed any devil cult killers approaching from behind. Even so, the string of tension in Lu Chen's heart did not loosen. Because in this world, no one understood the true craziness and danger of the devil cult followers of the three realms better than him. Generally speaking, if one wanted to enter the disorienting land from the passage around Crescent City and Longhu Mountain, if one wanted to go deeper into the disorienting land, the most common path would be the Black Armor Mountain Cyan Sunflower Cave. It could lead to the famous Desolate Valley, and it could also reach the Dragon River that separated the periphery of the disorienting land from the central region. This was the path that ordinary cultivators would choose under most circumstances. It was relatively safe and easy to travel. However, after walking in the direction of the Black Armor Mountain for a day, Lu Chen gave up on this idea and led the Atsu in another direction. One man and one wolf walked for a few days in the vast wilderness of the Land of Chaos, traversing through the primitive forests and rivers. After making a huge detour, they finally arrived at the lower reaches of a large river. They then began to walk up from the bottom. It was a journey along the shore of a wide and calm river. There were many dangers along the way, and many ferocious demonic beasts appeared. However, relying on Atu, who was now powerful, and Lu Chen, who was gradually recovering his strength, the two of them still managed to make it through without any danger. Until they arrived at a river valley. Standing at the entrance of the river valley and looking into the distance, they could see a tall mountain peak. If Lu Chen remembered correctly, that should be the Black Armor Mountain.
In the river valley in front of them, under the illumination of the sun, there was a sea of dazzling and beautiful flowers in full bloom, as if they were blooming brilliantly in the sun.
Everything seemed to float in front of them again, as if it was yesterday. Lu Chen stood quietly at the entrance of the river valley, gazing at the sea of flowers. The Atsu stood beside him with a somewhat gloomy expression. Occasionally, it would growl a few times uneasily, wagging its tail, and move closer to Lu Chen. Lu Chen nodded and sighed softly. He then reached out and touched the head of the Atsu, saying, let's go to the place where you first appeared." Of course, no one knew where Atsu was first born. Even the Atsu probably didn't have this memory. But that day, when Lu Chen and Xianxia passed through this river valley full of blood-devouring demon flowers, it was indeed the first time they saw the Atsu. Those days seemed to be fresh in their memory, as if it was yesterday, but now things were the same, but people had changed. Lu Chen and the Atsu walked along the edge of the river valley, always keeping a safe distance from the beautiful but extremely dangerous blood-devouring demon flowers. In the middle, Lu Chen had also seen the open space where the dying puppy was used as bait. But now it was flat without a trace, as if nothing had happened. Where was the person? If a person died, would it be as if nothing had happened? The beauty would vanish like smoke, and after all the prosperity was gone, there would only be a bleak cold wind blowing past. Lu Chen didn't know if there was an answer to this question. He just walked silently towards the forest. The Atsu followed behind him, raised its head and sniffed the air a few times. Suddenly, it let out a low growl, as if it was a little angry. They walked through the forest, all the way. Although it had been a long time, and the forest was full of weeds and thorns, Lu Chen still seemed to remember the path they walked through here. He led the Atsu around the strange rocks and trees in the forest, and then came to the side of the cave. Roar! Atu became even more agitated. His sharp teeth kept grinding against each other, making a terrifying sound. His eyes shone with a cold light as he scanned the surroundings of the cave. He looked like he was about to devour anyone who stood in his way. Lu Chen jumped down and looked around. He saw that the place was still full of strange rocks, but it seemed to have been abandoned for a long time. There was a lot of dust at the entrance of the cave, and he didn't know how long it had been since someone came in or out of it. He seemed to think of something and turned to look in a certain direction. At this time, the Atsu also jumped to his side and looked in the same direction. Then, their eyes stopped at a certain place at the same time. In the pile of rocks on the riverbank, a white bone was vaguely exposed. The Atsu growled, and Lu Chen nodded and walked over. The rocks gradually dispersed in front of his eyes. Under the sunlight, he saw a terrifying skeleton among the rocks. However, it was now scattered beyond recognition. Moreover, there were obvious bite marks on many of the bones. Lu Chen looked at the skeleton for a moment, expressionless, then turned to the Atsu and said lightly, "Let's go." He stepped over the skeleton, walked to the distance of the riverbank, and walked to the unknown forest in front of him, which no one had ever stepped into. In front of him, maybe it was the place where the barbarian came from. The Atsu shouted behind him and followed. When it walked past the pile of rocks, it stepped on the skull with one of its feet, and with a bang, the white skull was broken into pieces, and then it went far away. Chapter 250. The sudden battle on the night of the full moon was a great fright for Kunwu City, which had been peaceful for a long time. But to be honest, the destruction caused by this battle couldn't be considered particularly large. It was nothing more than some buildings collapsing and a few unlucky people who happened to get close to the muzzle of the gun and died gloomily. The reason for this situation was that the two parties involved in the battle, the Kunlun party and the Devil cult, were mostly young disciples. Although there were some outstanding disciples, they were generally a bit weaker. On the Kunlun party's side, there was a secret. Most of the powerful and profound Taoist master Yuanying were pinned down on Heavenly Kuan Peak. Compared to the threat of the Devil cult, the matter they had to face that night was more tense and urgent. On the Devil cult side, their strength had probably been damaged in the past 10 years. Few Yuanying experts with strong Taoist magic appeared, or even if there were experts, they were afraid of the Kunlun party's strength and didn't dare to make a move. As for the real reason, only the Devil cult themselves knew. In short, after the battle on the night of the full moon, although Kunwu City was in a state of panic for a while, it was still the territory of the Kunlun party. In the following days, the Kunlun party ruthlessly sifted this lively city and cleaned up many of the shadows that were originally hiding in the dark. As the saying goes, how can one allow others to sleep beside one's bed? The Kunlun party was one of the top sects in the world, so it was impossible for them to allow the Devil cult to develop their power next to them. As a result, the Devil cult spies in Kunwu City were almost wiped out. After all, Kunwu City was a place where the Kunlun party had operated for countless years. They were deeply rooted in every aspect and infiltrated everywhere. Once a serious investigation was carried out, the majority of the Devil cult spies wouldn't be able to hide. Following such a big movement, Kunwu City also quickly settled down. The dead were buried, the collapsed houses were rebuilt, and everything returned to its original appearance. It was bustling, flourishing as if nothing had ever happened. And what happened that night also became the topic of people's after-dinner conversations. Since ancient times, as long as it had nothing to do with them, in the eyes and hearts of most people in the world, it would end up like this. In the end, the big event would become a small matter, and then it would become a dry and colorless impression in their memories. But to those who were there, experienced that cruel battle, and witnessed death with their own eyes, those memories were completely different. They were filled with sorrow, anger, and hatred that was difficult to suppress. On that night, the Su family in Kunwu City was one of the places that suffered the most damage in the whole city. Their gate fell, their high walls collapsed, and in the end, many people died. Logically speaking, everyone only had one life, but there was no such thing as absolute fairness in this world. In everyone's eyes, some people's lives were more important and precious than others. After that night, the Su family sank into a gloomy atmosphere. Many people in their family died, but everyone seemed to only pay attention to the dead young man named Sumo because he was the son of the head of the Su family and Su Qingjuan's younger brother. White cloths were hung on the door, wreaths were piled up, and elegiac couplets were filled with sad eulogies that were both sincere and hypocritical. A coffin made of red nanmu was placed in front of the Su family's mourning hall. Over there, Sumo's mother's face was covered in tears, crying herself hoarse. Sumo's father, Su Tianhe, was handling many chores in front of the hall. As the head of the Su family and a man
He was obviously much more unyielding than his wife.
But even so, his expression was extremely haggard. In addition to them, many members of the Su family were also in front of the mourning hall.
Most of them were dressed in white, handling the unusually sad funeral affairs. Then, listening to the bitter wail of Madame Bai, all of them had complicated expressions and looked at each other from time to time.
Son, you died so miserably. It's a pity that you suffered such an unexpected disaster at such a young age. God is really blind. Why didn't the person who should die, but let me, the white-haired person, see the black-haired person die? The crying was extremely sharp, as if it was a sharp thorn that made people feel uncomfortable. Many people at the side frowned, but no one dared to speak. And compared to the grandeur of this mourning hall, the people who died at the same time that night were not so lucky. At this time, no one knew where they were. Either they had no funeral affairs and were hastily buried, or they were casually held by their own family members. While the place was bustling, a figure suddenly walked in from outside. It was Su Qingjun. Her body looked much thinner than before, and her face was still pale. It seemed that the injuries she had suffered that day had not healed. But to her, the injuries on her body were probably not important. Her entire appearance seemed to be much colder than before. Seeing Su Qingjun walk into the mourning hall, the surrounding people immediately quieted down. For a moment, only Madame Bai was still crying and screaming in front of her. At this moment, Su Qingjun was also dressed in white. She looked around, and her gaze finally fell on the coffin above the mourning hall and the crying mother. Her eyes could not help but redden a little, and she slowly walked over. She squatted behind Madame Bai and gently hugged her body. Madame Bai leaned against her chest, still crying non-stop, her mouth hoarsely crying non-stop. It seemed that Sumo's death was a great blow to her. Su Qingjun took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and then softly said, "Mother, please restrain your grief. Otherwise your body." "What's wrong with my body?" Madame Bai suddenly stopped crying, and asked coldly. Standing to the side, Su Tianhe seemed to feel something, frowned slightly, and turned to look at her. Su Qingjun was startled, and said, "You have been crying here for 2 days, you should rest, or your body will not be able to take it." "If I can't take it, then just die." Madame Bai suddenly threw herself to the side of the coffin and cried. Su Qingjun hurriedly pulled her back, and tried to persuade her, but her mouth was almost dry, but there was no reaction from Madame Bai. Instead, after a short pause, Madame Bai suddenly turned to glare at her, and a trace of hatred and anger appeared in her eyes. Su Qingjun was shocked and said, "Mother, why are you looking at me like this? Let me ask you, why didn't you save Mo? Why did you watch him die?" Madame Bai suddenly raised her voice, and asked loudly to Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun's head buzzed, and it seemed that she couldn't react for a moment. She looked at her mother in shock, and the large group of people in the mourning hall instantly fell silent. After a moment, Su Qingjun said with a trembling voice, "Mother, no, it's not like that." Madame Bai suddenly stood up, and stared at Su Qingjun with a distorted face and shouted, "I saw it clearly that day. You obviously had the upper hand in the battle with that scoundrel. Why did you suddenly lose? Also, that scoundrel clearly knew you. He originally wanted to kill your father and me, but you stopped him. Why didn't you stop him from killing?" Su Qingjun's mouth was half open, and she wanted to say something, but stopped. There was sorrow and pain on her face, and after a moment, 2 clear lines of tears flowed down. She just shook her head and smiled bitterly, and said in a low voice, "Mother, it's not like that." The surrounding crowd was in an uproar, and the sound of discussion instantly merged into a wave of sound. At this moment, who knew how many people were looking at Su Qingjun with a strange gaze? The originally high and mighty woman, who was already a genius of Jindan Friar at such a young age, at this moment, it seemed that she could be despised and discussed at will, like a beautiful jade covered in dust, and everyone couldn't help but want to trample on her. "Enough!" There was a shout, and it was Su Tianhe who strode over. His face was dark, but he looked around, and then directly waved his hand, saying, "Everyone, please leave for a moment. Our family has something to say." He had been in charge of the Su family for many years, and people had always been in awe of him. Although this action was a little unreasonable in front of the mourning hall, in the end, everyone slowly left. When only the 3 of them were left in the mourning hall, Su Tianhe's expression eased a little.
He silently glanced at his wife who was standing next to him in tears, and after a sigh he said, Jianghu was just trying to persuade you out of kindness. Why did you deliberately embarrass her in front of so many people?
Madame Bai's face was gloomy. She suddenly pointed at the coffin and cried, Is what I said wrong?
Mo is lying in there now, without a complete corpse, and his body has been separated from his body, and his body has been stabbed so many times.
Isn't he pitiful? As his sister, don't you feel even a little bit guilty? She said the last sentence to Su Qingjun while crying. Su Qingjun clenched her teeth, but did not say a word. Su Tianhe looked at his wife, who seemed to have gone mad, and then looked at Su Qingjun.
He let out a long sigh, and then pulled Su Qingjun to the side of the mourning hall. After they were a little further away from Madame Bai, Su Tianhe lowered his voice and said, Jun, when his funeral is finished, you should go back to Kunlun Mountain.
Su Qingjuan's body shook, and her face was pale.
She trembled and said, Father, do you also blame me?
Do you not want me any more?
Su Tianhe shook his head and said, Mer's death, of course, I am also heartbroken, but not to the extent of losing my mind.
Su Qingjun shed tears and said, Then why did you ask me to leave the family? Shouldn't you ask me to stay here to help you? Su Tianhe smiled bitterly and said, There's nothing to help. That's all there is to it.
In fact, the Su family will be handed over to you sooner or later, and the others are not worth mentioning. He paused and said, I asked you to leave first, mainly because I don't want to provoke your mother. She loved Mo the most in her life, and his death is a great blow to her.
You should stay away for the time being.
Su Qingjun said in a low voice. Then when can I come back? Su Tianhe shook his head and said, I don't know, maybe. A glimmer of hope appeared on Su Qingjuan's face, and she asked, Maybe what?
Su Tianhe glanced at Madame Bai in the distance, and his eyes flickered slightly.
He said softly, You have seen your mother.
She has lost her mind, and I am also worried that something will happen to her. Maybe if you can avenge Sumo, you will treat her better, and you can come back at any time. Su Qingjuan's body trembled slightly, and then she quickly fell silent. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.